Welcome everybody to the 383rd meeting of the Texas Animal Health Commission. Again, welcome everybody. Appreciate it. I think we have 100% turnout of all of our commissioners, correct? Fantastic. Welcome to all of our guests, and we'll call the meeting to order and move to item 2 and ask for approval of the minutes of the 382nd.
Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of the 382nd Commission meeting held on January 24th, 2012.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the 382nd Commission meeting. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, Dr. Ellis will give his report of his activities since the last Commission meeting. Dr. Ellis, good morning.
Morning.
And let's turn our cell phones to mute.
Sorry about that. He's over boogieing down.
We have fun on this corner.
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and thanks for coming. Welcome back. My report, bullet points of my report are in your booklet. You can follow along. I do have some amendments to it that I thought about in the middle of the night when I woke up and realized I forgot some stuff. So there is a few things. But anyway, I'll just run through the general report of the agency, starting with just the overall agency review, general state of affairs. I think that the agency has gone through and dealt with the budget issues that cards that we were dealt. We finished our reductions in force, and it bottomed out as an organizational FTE count at about 125 people right now. And in fact, we're probably in the process of starting to evaluate and develop some strategic plan to hire a few people back. You know, I'm not going to say we overreacted on our layoffs, but we had to make sure we met our budget, and now we're trying to realize which was the most important thing that we lost that we need to gain back. And so you are going to see a slow evaluation and rehiring of some strategic people. We allotted some merit raises for the first time in 3 years to our staff that were eligible on May 1st, as well as took a look at the salary structure for some reclassifications, just some other technical HR ways to evaluate job functions and salary. And I want to thank our HR director, Larissa Smith, for handling that. She's very good at what she does. I don't even know if she's in here. Yeah, there she is, Larissa. She's had a rough year, and I want to thank her for all she's done on behalf of the agency. It's the best interest and employees' best interest as well. We've also completed inspector workshops. We had 2 groups of inspectors come in, and also our veterinarians and our regional management. And I want to thank Chairman Morales for taking the time. He came over and spoke personally to the 2 groups of field staff in San Marcos. There, it was very well received, and they were pleasantly surprised and honored to have the chairman come and talk to our field staff. So I want to thank you, Ernie, for taking the time to come do that. Well done. At this point, we've had a couple of key departures from my executive staff. Dr. Cochran left in April as the Assistant Executive Director for Finance, Admin, and also some vet stuff. And Dr. Hensley started his new job yesterday with TVMDL/AgriLife. And so we have two of my 3 Assistant Executive Directors are vacant right now, so we're in the process of filling those back. And we have rehired part of Matt, not the vet part of Dr. Cochran, but the Director of Administration Finance. And truthfully, in retrospect, it was almost an untenable situation that he was put in a few years ago when he was moved up to try and do some veterinary work as well as run all the other parts of this agency in the back, from money to computers to purchasing. And anyway, I want to introduce to y'all Sammy Chadley. He's our new Director for Administration Finance. Sammy, right here. And he'll take Dr. Cochran's place as far as managing the money, the computers, the purchasing, and the budget, which is a huge undertaking. And we welcome you to the team. I don't know if you want to say anything or not, but you don't have to. You want to say hello?
Hello. Basically, just transferred from the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and I'm glad to be here and looking forward to working with Dr. Ellis and all the staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
So his budget was $350 million at the last job, $6 million for us, so he should be able to handle the number, the decimals.
You bring money with you?
Yeah, but he's worked with the state agencies for 16 years, last as budget director there and budget manager before that, and he's got a finance degree and an MBA from Texas State University, and he lives in Kyle with his wife and two young boys, so we welcome him, and he's already hit the road running, so to speak, and so thanks for being here. Right now, we're also going to take a look. Probably going to post Dr. Hensley's position as is, which is the manager of field staff and emergency management, probably later today. I just truthfully hadn't had a chance to sit down with Marissa and make sure we're on the same page on the posting. So Dr. Hensley's job is going to go back up for hiring, hopefully today or tomorrow, whenever we can get it up. And we're also, after I've talked to the chairman, a few of our industry folks, partners as well, on the concept, and I'm going to repost the legislative liaison position that has been vacant, that Bill Powers originally had for a year and a half. It won't be exactly the same job, though. What we're going to look at, I'm looking at two classes of people. Someone that could come in and do what Bill did, just pure legislative liaison. I'm not sure that's a full-time position for this agency in the opposite year. But we really need some help with our rulemaking, and so Gene's overwhelmed, and I'm overwhelmed, to be quite honest. Trying to write rules are really time-consuming. There were rules that didn't get on this agenda. We just didn't get them finished. And so what I'm going to actually do is post the position as either a legislative liaison and/or / attorney position and see what we can get. I'm not sure what we can afford, but if we could get a young attorney that can come in and do some legislative work and also help Gene and me write rules and reevaluate rules. There's a process where you're supposed to reevaluate all your agency rules every so many years, and that's a challenge for us to meet those deadlines. So we're going to put that up, and we're looking at two classes of people. One may just be a good staffer from state or Senate, House or Senate person that's looking to change jobs, or a young attorney that we could afford that could help us in both. And obviously, we'll just see what our candidate pool looks like and go from there. But I am going to post that position and see what we can kind of like throw the trot line out with different bait and see what we catch, and then keep or throw it back. So the agency right now in the off year of the legislative session, we're going through some required planning, strategic planning, budgetary planning. Working closely with the Legislative Budget Board folks, and I don't know if our legislative analyst is here. We have a new analyst, Jeff Poole. He's took Selma's place, who's been our analyst for a number of years. And we also have a new staff person from the governor's office. Toby Baker, who was our staff person, has gone over to be a commissioner at TCQ. And so a fellow named Tucker Royal is now our governor's staff liaison. Every agency has a rep that they work with on the governor's staff. And my understanding, he may be temporary as well, as he's also going to TCQ to work over there. So, but for now, so we're going through some dialogue with entities down at the Capitol that basically have to do with planning and strategies as we move forward. And not to get too technical, but one of the things we have to do is turn in any changes to our agency's goals, strategies, outputs, and outcomes, and things like that. And I just gave you some examples there. For example, an output is how many tests we run at the laboratory. Well, we obviously are down, we're estimating downward because of the changes in brucellosis testing. That's an output. So the output's how many tests you run. The outcome is, well, we're looking for brucellosis. So we also amended some of our outcomes, and we added 2 new ones for pyroplasmosis and trichomoniasis. They weren't even on our radar the last time we did this planning 3 years ago. And we've also asked for one new fiscal strategy for the 4th session in a row on emergency management, and that's the only part that's not finished, and they're evaluating that. And actually, I'm kind of thinking that they're favorably evaluating it right now because of the leadership we're providing to the state on emergency management. And it's not even necessarily asking for more money, it's just pulling the emergency management role of the agency out from stuck down in the middle of animal health and just have it as a standalone entity for budgetary reasons. And so we'll see how that goes. Next up is to actually rewrite, amend the strategic plan, which we do every 2 years, and also the LAR, the budget, and at your next commission meeting, you'll have that to evaluate and look at. Also in your book, Bonnie, our public information officer, I've asked her to always give you some examples of outreach we do or the interaction with the public, and I think y'all probably all see our press releases, and we try and make you aware of things that happen, good or bad, hopefully good, and so they're in your book to review. And I want to thank Bonnie for doing a good job. One of the issues, and just one of the recent things we released was a press release on border issues on horses with pyroplasmosis that were caught coming in across West Texas. I can see that as being part of a series of releases we'll do. They're actually this week trying to catch some cattle out in West Texas that we know came from Mexico in at least 2 different locations using helicopters in partnership with ourselves and USDA Veterinary Services. We'll catch those cows and we'll test them, and we may put out some information. I think it's important to continue to maintain to the public and to our stakeholders the relevance and the risk in West Texas to Mexico and an unguarded border. And there's also a USDA research or a evaluation going on, a formal study to look at the risk, and maybe by this fall we'll have some answers from USDA as to the official scientific evaluation of what is the risk to the United States and to Texas from Mexico border with Texas. So those things are all underway there. Any questions so far? If not,
I did, Dr. Ellis, we had started, we had a meeting a few months ago, strategic planning with a couple of commissioners and our staff. We've lost 2 of those staff members. Are we going to, when we get those positions filled, probably need to get back and schedule another meeting? Is that what you're thinking after we get the staff back in place?
That's at your pleasure. We should have a draft of our strategic plan narrative done in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure that we need to meet before then, but certainly later this summer, if you'd like, we can just sit down and see where things have gone in the last 6 months. There's a lot of dynamic changes that are happening all the time in our disease programs, and especially with Mexico and with this deer situation we're going to talk about and some other things. So I'll just commit that we'll get back together and take another look at it, whether it's linked exactly formally to the strategic plan that the state requires. I'm not sure that that's as important as that we're just continuing to work towards a common goal. And if that's what you'd like to do, we'll
Sure.
just put something together.
Good.
Okay. Trichomoniasis, bovine trichomoniasis, if anybody in the audience doesn't know, it's a venereal disease of bulls. It's a 3-year-old program. And it's a new program for us. It's a control program, not eradication program. And I attended, along with Dr. Swartz, we attended a Western States Livestock Association meeting in Boise, Idaho in March, where all the state vets, basically west of the Mississippi, go to that. There were about 25 there out of the 30 or so that could have gone. And one of the things that came out of that was a consensus of the state vets is to try and align our trick rules a little bit better. They're all over the board, mainly because they're new programs for all of us to a certain degree. Some are scientific, some are not. Some are industry-driven understandings or misunderstandings or biases. And so to the best ability that we could, we all promised that we'd go back and try and bring some science into some of the rules for entry and the rules within a state for trick, and also just explain and calm some fears down. And so with that background, our trick working group met. I think Texas has got one of the better programs in that once a year the trick working group does meet to evaluate how things are going, and Commissioner Locke led that for us here. And there were about 20 folks at the meeting. This room was, these tables, this was all full, and there were tables back here. There was stakeholders and a lot of interested parties there. I think the consensus of the meeting was the program's going well. They were comfortable with the way the commission is using some discretion, common sense, whatever, and balancing that with regulatory needs and science-based decisions. Coming out of that, now this is one of the things, we didn't get the rules on the agenda this time, so I'm just going to generally, and Commissioner Locke, you may want to say something here in a second. I'll give you the opportunity. So we have so that's a non-binding group that basically just talks, gives input, and kind of makes some recommendations back to me and my staff and the commissioner, our beef commissioner, as to ideas for possible rule changes or proposals. There are a couple of things that are probably going to be proposed at the next meeting at the discretion of Commissioner Locke and Morales, who will also be involved. So it's not finalized yet, but I can tell you the 2 things there were a couple of things on that were prominent on the agenda. that were also relevant to all the state vets trying to get together and say, let's do this the same way. And one of them is a newer study that's come out, a scientific study that's showing that pooled samples for trick, where you put 5 bull tests into one sample at the lab, not at the vet clinic, but at the lab, is not that much less acceptable to find positive animals, only about 4% less sensitivity than not, and so that's a huge money saving to the industry. So I think what I'm anticipating that at the next commission meeting you will see some rule proposals allowing pool samples, bovine trick pool samples at the lab for up to 5 bulls into one test for change of ownership, and also for entry into Texas. And this will be basically what you're looking at. There's, from the lab perspective, you're cutting the cost for 5 bulls from $125 down to about $30. Now the vet's still going to charge for each bull that's collected and all that, but the lab, you're going to cut quite a bit of cost from the laboratory down. So that was an issue that was discussed at length, and it was determined that it was probably it's probably going to be proposed, and I don't want to speak for Commissioner Locke yet. Also, another thing that had a lot of discussion was untested bulls that went to feed yards or feeding dry lot facilities. Then what? Right now, our rules say, well, they got to go on from there to to a slaughter plant. And after a lot of discussion, it was decided that it was probably okay to let them come back to the market to be resold, then to go to a slaughter plant, or they could be tested back at the market. So the balance there was, it's going to be a lot of trouble, it's going to be hard to do, but on the other hand, from a disease and a scientific position, there's really no risk. If the bulls have been in a feedlot, they're not going to catch a venereal disease, and so it's an accommodation that I think we can work out, and so you're going to probably see, that's partially just a policy issue, but Commissioner Jordan, that's going to allow some of these guys feeding thin bulls to bring them back to the sale to be sold, and then our people at the market will make sure they either get a test there or they go on to slaughter like they're supposed to. So those are the two biggest issues. We're still waiting on some clarification from the diagnostic lab. There's quite a bit of discussion with some of the veterinarians in the room about clarity on shipping times, how many hours are the samples still good, and so and Dr. Cochran actually was here as their rep. It was one of his first days, and so he was going to go back and try and get some answers, and so we're going to wait on that before we put out official notice on that. But the veterinarians across the state are asking for some clarification. How long can we hold them at our clinic, ship them? Weekends are always an issue, and it's a process where you've got to keep the sample viable. So that was that. It was a good meeting, and Commissioner Locke, do you want to follow up at anything? But those are the two most significant issues that came out of that working group.
You covered it very well. I'd just like to say that we have a great working group, and we've got some tremendous input from a wide variety of professions within the industry. And I just want to thank everybody that serves on that working group, because they did come in here and make a good hand. Very appreciated.
So the next meeting, there'll be some stuff for y'all to look at. And if any of you in the meantime want some more information, you can get with us, and we'll be glad to talk to you. Next up is my topic on brucellosis, and Dr. Swartz is also going to cover, and Dr. Pritzker, you're talking to on the lab. So yeah, we got a tag team there. So I'm not going to say much on the lab, other than I want to thank Holly and Andy and our staff, a lot of the folks in the room. Converting to a fee-based process for lab testing has been a lot harder than any of us would have thought. It's still not over. We're still in the early stages of working with the practicing veterinarians across the state on billable issues and communication and lab information system changes. But we're in the process of starting that, and I'll let them talk about it. I just want to thank them for all their hard work. The bottom line is our numbers are going to continue to drop even more, but from the changes in national surveillance reduction, our stoppage in first point testing, and then when we start charging, even though we're going to charge $1, which is by far the cheapest test probably in the United States, we're going to continue to see our brucellosis testing numbers drop, which means our surveillance is going away as well for that disease, and I'll let them say more. There is going to be a rule, it's a brucellosis rule later on ear tagging that's going to come up, and I'm going to give y'all my opinion on it right now. It's not my position, because my position is whatever y'all decide, that's what our staff is going to work through, but I just want to make sure I went on the record on my perspective, I guess, on this rule. And the bottom line, the issue is traceability and tagging cattle, and then the truth is traceability is not cheap. You just have to decide what's it worth, and that's y'all's deliberation. How much are we willing to pay as an industry and as an individual for a traceability, and how good of a traceability do you want? But from my perspective, tagging an adult cow or bull at a change of ownership transaction wherever is just an insurance policy. One, that farmer or rancher is not going to unnecessarily have to test his cattle or be involved in a trace later because we're not sure who owned them. And we're doing that right now. We've had a number of situations where there's a whole load of cattle without identification, and we're not sure which cow and which owner it was, and we've had to test multiple herds. So that's one way to look at it. It's also, truthfully, for the market industry, a business continuity plan to help prevent or minimize or mitigate long-term shutdowns in the state. If we have a catastrophic disease and we have good traceability, we'll get back to business quicker. And with the foot and mouth disease outbreak, and I said this at the LMA convention earlier this year, we will close markets on day one of a foot and mouth disease outbreak. We will stop the movement of cattle in the state of Texas, feed yards too for that matter. And so traceability will be one of the keys not only to fighting the disease but getting everybody back in business as soon as they can. So keep that in mind. It'll increase the consumer confidence in the trade, in their confidence with our trade partners, and there are other states that tag cattle right now, including Oklahoma tags their cattle, similar to the rule that's been proposed. And it'll also ensure immediate compliance with the anticipated USDA rules, which are now fast-tracked because of the BSE case in California. And they're saying now that the federal rules are going to come out probably by the end of the summer instead of next fall or later. So we're going to see some interstate movement restrictions on all species, not just cattle, coming by this fall for sure. And obviously, any rule that the agency passes, whether it's testing of horses at a stable or a brucellosis test in the country or a tagging, it's ultimately going to be a voluntary compliance, a good faith effort with just spot checking by our folks on just the really bad apples. And other than that, it's anything that's passed like this ultimately has to be based on the assumption that the industry will voluntarily comply and do the best they can. And obviously our agency will work with those folks too on special situations. If the rule is passed, I don't anticipate, and we've had discussions with the industry, I don't see us as an agency trying to even enforce this until after the 1st of next year. We're going to need at least 6 months or longer to do outreach, education, information, establish who our partners will be on this thing, and work through some internal details of computer systems and tracking. So we're looking at an anticipated implementation, unless I'm directed otherwise, it'll be no sooner than the 1st of January of 2013. And I can try and start working on an implementation plan from the staff level. Myself and my staff can start to put together a draft implementation plan in the next 45 days or so. And then obviously get back with the industry and take some input and make sure we haven't missed anything. And so that's my plan, if you do pass that, is to start to work on it, and then as always we'll work with the industry to fine-tune and refine our ideas and move forward in that fashion. So that's my plan there. And the reason I'm saying this now, and Gene and I talked about this, really the structure of these commission meetings, there's not really a way, when we propose rules, there's not really a way for me to stand up. Usually Gene stands up and goes over the rules. So what I'm doing is I'm talking about proposals now in my talk, because otherwise I got to get up and down every time, and so that's why I'm talking about that now rather than when the rule comes up, and obviously I'll still be available. One last thing on brucellosis that I didn't put in this report that occurred to me this morning was in regard to Yellowstone in the states of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And I guess Texas will take some of the blame or the credit for this, but as a result of our Western states meeting, it's become obvious to Dr. Swartz and I and some of us that are very experienced in brucellosis epidemiology that we're not real comfortable with some of the animal movements coming out of those states right now from what they call the designated surveillance area. Basically, Yellowstone has brucellosis in elk and in bison and occasionally in cattle. And so they've developed a zone around the park where cattle live, and cattle coming out of that park have to have a test for the most part. There's 3 states, and the rules are a little different, but they're allowed to move on 1 negative test. Well, the truth is, in the springtime, when the elk abort especially, an animal can come out with 1 negative test and can be incubated in the disease. They've found 5 newly infected herds for brucellosis in those 3 states this year. They've had trace outs go to a number of other states, not Texas yet, but the truth is that with our loss of surveillance, with our loss of our first point testing, what I see is the imminent loss of national surveillance to basically probably an almost ineffective level of surveillance in slaughter plants. We could get brucellosis and not even know it for years and years and years until it spreads to neighbors and other things. And so we're considering, I ask the state vets, and I consider all three of those guys my friend, I really do, but still on y'all's behalf, we've had 2 conference calls, one with the other state vets in the West and one with just me and Andy. Have asked them for some more information, and they're very interested in what Texas has to say, not because they trade the most with us, but they know we're, 1, the 800-pound gorilla. If we pass a rule or you guys pass a rule, the other states are right behind us, and 2, they know what we're talking about for brucellosis because we're designated EPIs, and Andy and I together probably managed 1,500 to 2,000 infected herds. There's no one else in the United States that knows what we know about brucellosis. So we've asked them to come back with some better information on their protocols and on their maps, and we may wait till U.S. Animal Health to make any decisions in the fall. I may give them that opportunity to have this, but I'm leaning towards recommending to y'all that you consider a rule requiring a retest on cattle coming from Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming that are coming out of the designated surveillance area or close to that, because they can have brucellosis. 1 negative test is not enough in a zone where there's an endemic disease that is obviously on the spread. And one of those states doesn't test bulls at all coming out of the zone. One of those states is not quarantining heifers until after they've calved. And some of them are on a voluntary program that if they see that the elk have gotten with their cows, the rancher's just supposed to let the state know. I'm not real comfortable with that because the elk absolutely, there's a very high prevalence of brucellosis in those elk, and they abort and they give it to cattle. It's the same species of brucellosis abortus. And so stay tuned for that, and I may give them till USHA in the fall to clarify their case, but I think we probably need to look at a post-entry test on cattle coming from those parts of those states to protect our cattle with our loss of surveillance systems. I'll stop there unless there's any questions.
Are they requiring all their heifers to be kept vaccinated? I know going up there this summer, we went and adult vaccinated a lot of our cows going to those states.
I think they are. I think that's right. There's about 11 or 12 western states that require calf vaccination. And I would have to say that after the drought last year, I've changed my position on calf vaccination in Texas a little bit because of the trouble I saw with our folks trying to move heifers to those states that didn't have a vaccination tag, and also the fact that it's just good traceability, and an orange vaccination tag is a pretty good trace for us, and then also the fact that I just see the National Brucellosis Program. It's sad to say it's not going to eradicate it. There's a conduit control program, and we're going to see that in Texas. I think y'all are going to see at these meetings, we're going to come back and talk to y'all about, well, we've got another TB case. We've got another brucellosis case. The good news is we're not going to lose our status ever again. I don't think there's any. Bad news is, though, there's not going to be that same impetus to do something about it at the national level and even at the industry level. So we're going to have to be vigilant. As the commission, I would encourage to be vigilant to try and protect the rest of the state. So, so the calf vaccination, yes, those western states require them to move back and forth. And our Texas cattle got into some of those issues last year trying to move up there, and we were able to do some adult vaccination. And but the calf vaccination will not cure or prevent the disease. It's just a good insurance policy. It's 80 to 90% effective. And if you've got a vaccinated heifer that goes over and licks around on an aborted elk fetus, they're probably going to catch brucellosis. They probably will. Not every time, but most of the time. So
Louisiana requires a vaccination.
yeah, there's a number of states that do, and it's almost all from here west. Next, I'd like to talk about border port issues a little bit. Since the last commission meeting, another port is closed. Del Rio is now closed due to border violence. So that's all the ports in Texas have closed for border violence except Presidio, Ojinaga across the river, and that was closed temporarily about a month ago for about a week, and then they reopened it. So what we have right now is inspections for Mexican import cattle in Laredo, Texas, Pharr, Texas, and Eagle Pass, Texas, and USDA is in the final stages of retrofitting the old TDA, Texas Department of Ag pens in Del Rio for inspections to begin in Del Rio, Texas for cattle that used to be inspected across through Acuna. We had a meeting that Animal Health Commission and I went down and facilitated on behalf of the cattle industry with the cattlemen from Mexico in regard to a new facility in the state of Nuevo Leon, just north of Laredo, that's going to open in about, well, it's, I don't know, they said April, then they said June, now they're saying mid-July. Let's just say end of July. They basically have a state-of-the-art inspection facility 1 mile from the river on the Columbia Bridge north of Laredo in the state of Nuevo Leon. That's going to have the ability to cross 3,000 to 4,000 head a day if they want to. These other places that we're looking at now are crossing about 1,000 a day, more or less. The issue is that USDA doesn't have the infrastructure to support another port. That means there are 5 ports south of Del Rio, and there's only 4 USDA teams. So the discussion was whether they close another port or they bring in a temporary team and they evaluate how Nuevo Leon's going to do. Nuevo Leon's position is it's such a good facility, they're going to get cattle from other ports and other parts of Mexico. Tamaulipas, who's using Laredo, which is the port most likely to close, is saying, well, their numbers are not going to drop because they're not going to let their guys go to Nuevo Leon, and in fact, they're going to go recruit Veracruz and other southern Mexican cattle and or market more cattle through their port to maintain the numbers. And so USDA is trying to evaluate, do we get another team, another $300,000 or $500,000 a year expense to manage 5 ports, or do we close them down? And you've right now got 2 out of Coahuila, 2 out of Tamaulipas, and 1 crossing from Nuevo Leon, all different states. All those states' cattle associations make money off of the pins, the inspection process, the health certificates, the tagging. They make money off of that, and that's how they support their program, so they're very defensive of any loss of volume. And so it's kind of one of those odd things that I was more than happy to facilitate. I want to thank Carol for helping get interpreters in the room and all the things that went with having a meeting in Nuevo Leon. It went well. Everyone left understanding what they needed to do. I think the cattlemen from the United States and cattle feeders were there, Southwest Cattle Raisers were there, Farm Bureau was there. Their position is they just want to, we want Mexican cattle. We need to be dependent upon the volume. We want to know, what good quality and how many are coming. And I don't think they was concerned about where they came across, is the fact they did come across and USDA gave good service so that it didn't impact the ability to feed animals, because right now there's places to put cattle if we had them. So the next meeting of that group is going to be at the binational meeting in Mexico in July. And basically Nuevo Leon and the Tamaulipas cattlemen are both told, go back and define better explain where your cattle are going to come from, what your numbers going to be, and USDA is going to go back and come back with a plan on how they're going to manage this. And it's a significant issue, because if they close a port and they close the wrong port, it could cause some infighting among the Mexican states, and it could also impact the ability to cross cattle, which for y'all in the cattle business is a significant issue. So we're going to continue to play a role in facilitating that on behalf of the cattle industry. And I don't know anybody, there's John Johnson in the audience, and so I don't know if he'll want to speak on that later if he has any comments, but we're doing our best. It's one of the roles of the Animal Health Commission, just to facilitate trade and marketability and healthy crossings of animals. And I'm optimistic on the meeting, but the burden of problems and right now are on U.S. Department of Agriculture. Dr. Varner, who's usually here, and next time I'm going to have him on the agenda from now on. He gets 5 minutes to talk to y'all. He's not here today because he's down there in the border with his bosses. They're trying to figure it out. They're going to Presidio del Rio, Amistad, Laredo. They're trying to figure out from a budgetary and a service standpoint, what do we do? How do we manage this? And the problem with border port management for USDA is it's not a Texas issue, it's a national issue. So if they want to add another team, they're impacting the Canadian ports and the Arizona ports, and so they're not able to just easily make changes to what they do. And so it's a bureaucratic problem as well. Dr. Vickers.
Did they mention in this meeting about the numbers of cattle that are being stolen by the cartels and moved from one state to another and then moving them in here?
No.
There's a lot of that going on.
I think the cartels,
I've had
they have
3 of my
influence.
clients over there. They had to move off their ranch, and they went in there and just stole their cattle and took them.
Well, I know the challenges for ranching in Mexico, and there's still some Americans and Texans doing that. It's just really hard. I mean,
Well, the
to get
problem
down
is,
there
in Mexico, when you move cattle off the ranch, they have an inspector there, the state inspector to give them a permit, and of course, that's not happening. a lot of cases. But anyway,
It wasn't mentioned specifically because probably the truth is if the cattle are stolen, they're still going to be sold and marketed and liquidate the assets. So we're going to get them either way. Who's the real owner, that didn't come up in
Well,
the
but
meeting.
remember, we had that TB quarantine in Colwilla a couple of years ago. You know.
It's a problem, and I would say my perspective, the state most impacted right now is actually Chihuahua. They're seeing a lot of corruption issues in Chihuahua with regulatory disease programs and movements of cattle. And that's why they were downgraded. Their status was downgraded, TB status was downgraded last year and has not been reinstated. Move on to fever ticks just for a little bit. Still good news. Our numbers are down. And I think this is a combination of good weather and good luck and good management, improved management. I'm still not happy with the management. We're going to work on that. I'm going tomorrow. We have a management meeting, and I'm going to go down there. Dr. Swartz and Primsky and I are all going down there to continue to work on refining the management of fever tick infestations in the systematic and free zone. Our numbers are down, as you can see there. We only have 13 infested premises out of the systematic, and a couple of years ago that number was about 70 or so. So we've really made some progress and continue to evaluate the temporary blankets, and I think there's another part of the last blanket under consideration for release. I'm not sure we're going to or not, but we have a process now with our EPI staff to take a look at that. There's been a lot of talk about Cuban vaccine, and in the meantime, what I would recommend is a more desirable outcome is the vaccine from a company called Pfizer has agreed to work with us and bring in a vaccine that would actually be made. The parts will be assembled in the United States, but it's actually an Australian vaccine. But the good news there is that USDA has agreed that if we work with Pfizer, they're not going to require any onerous slaughter inspection reporting requirements for cattle that have been vaccinated. So the plan right now is for the Pfizer vaccine, the permits to import it have started. In fact, they're probably already making it in the United States, up in Michigan, I think. We're going to start some shoot-side trials with ARS, USDA ARS in the fall, and then right after the first of the year, they'll evaluate that and immediately go into a field trial that should last about 4 months, and if all goes well, and basically if nothing dies and it's halfway effective, it won't be any better than the Cuban vaccine. It's the same base components. By next summer, we'll have available a vaccine that we can use that's not going to have to be evaluated with the threat of Cuban issues on an ongoing basis. And so I think this is, it always is next year, but I think what I'm feeling right now is this is probably a concrete date that by next summer, we'll have a vaccine available that we can trust. They're going to continue to work with USDA to refine the antigens because we're really looking for a MicroPlus vaccine, and this is not this is only going to be 30 to 40% effective against the southern tick. But this is the collaboration process we need with some novel antigens that USDA ARS has basically in their refrigerator somewhere. The Pfizer's, it's a win-win. We're going to start to get a vaccine, and Pfizer's going to get some access to make a better vaccine that hopefully will eventually be effective against MicroPlus, because every new of the 40 new premises infested this year, all of them are MicroPlus. None of them are annulatus, which is the other tick that's up farther north around Del Rio in that area. And so that's good news that we've agreed this summer, and I visited a little bit last week when I was in Laredo with the industry guys about having a meeting of the Texas Animal Health Commission Fever Tick Committee. We haven't had that committee meet in a couple of years because we've just been using the TSCRA process. They have a tick committee, but we're going to actually have a meeting in South Texas. Maybe take a look at the Mission Research Center. Any of y'all are going to be invited that are interested in that. And one of the reasons I want to have this meeting now is as the timing is right for us to talk to the industry about some needed changes. You can see there's some policy changes that we can institute. There's some rule changes that y'all can institute if you choose, but I don't want that to be done without prior discussion. And there's also some statutory needs. The statutory need is that basically our law says we can order a guy to pin his cattle and dip them. What we need them to say is they can be treated, so they can be with ivermectin tubs or with a vaccine. We need to broaden that definition from dipping to some nebulous term, whatever the technology is that we have to work with. And you wonder, why do we need that? Well, if the people voluntarily agree, that's fine, but if we run into someone who says, I don't want to vaccinate my cattle, we don't have the authority to make them. And one of my vision, and Dr. Varner's vision, if the industry agrees and if you guys agree in a couple of years, is all the cattle in the systematic, all the susceptible species will know where they're at. We'll have them mapped. We'll have an inventory. They'll have official permanent ID in their ears at all time, which would be a rule change by y'all. And we'll give them free vaccine, we'll give them free ivermectin, we'll give them free products, but the truth is they need to use it. When we find an infested premise, they need to use it under our direction to treat the ticks. And if we do that, then our buffer zone will be an effective zone and they're not going to get out. And so that's where we're headed with this, but I want to talk to the industry, because obviously if the industry and stakeholder groups don't want to do that, then we'll just live with what we've got. But my vision is an effective rules and effective statutory authority and effective management policies to uniformly make sure all the cattle are treated right now, or looked at every year. That's not even the case right now. There are ranches that are not penning their cattle every year. We can make them do that by policy right now, but when we put them in the pen right now, I can't make them put a tag in their ear, and I can't make them take that vaccine or have their treated corn or have the ivermectin in the tubs if they don't want to do it. So there's some weaknesses there that we want to talk about. Any questions on ticks? If not, I'll move on. But I do want to have a meeting with our tick committee later this summer to continue that dialogue and see if they agree with my opinion.
Under that scenario that you described in your vision, do you see that possibly there'll be free movement of cattle out of that quarantine zone down the road?
No. The question is, will it be free? No, a systematic zone is a systematic zone. But the point is, I'm trying to make the systematic zone an effective barrier, so those 13 free premises should only be 1 or 2, and they should be right across the road. And there's still the case, it was more so 2 years ago, there's some people issues down there, and there's some accountability issues with USDA that I'm still not comfortable with. Dr. Primsky's going to work on some mapping with Andy on trying to get a better visualization of where the ranches are, and so that at any time you ask me, I should be able to tell you exactly how many cattle are in that zone. That's a very small, we're talking about just, hundreds or thousands at most. The maximum we thought was 10 or 11,000. Probably there's no more than 5 or 6,000 in the entire systematic zone. That's not very many cattle. We ought to be able to know where exactly they're at, when was the last time they were penned, and what processes are underway. And so I want to tighten that down. But no, I don't see us ever weakening that process. I just don't see it. It's an ongoing risk.
Across, stuff like that.
Well, we can use, I'll tell you where we could relax. If we have that kind of an infrastructure and we have high fenced, especially high fenced places for deer and other things, we should be able to relax our decisions on how far out to make people pen their cattle and scratch and all that. I think we could give more credence to fencing and other epidemiology risk mitigation factors. So I'm not going to say we wouldn't relax a little bit if we had all those things in place, but I think you have to conceptually maintain that's a quarantine area, and any movement out of there will be for cause and scientific justification. Just mention real quickly vesicular stomatitis. It's a disease of cattle and horses. It pops up every couple of years. It's kind of a pain in our rear, to be quite honest. The only real relevance in horses is just the movement restrictions. If it jumps into cattle, it can really affect them, especially in a dairy. It could cause some trouble in a dairy trying to milk cattle with lesions on their udder. And it does look like foot and mouth, and that's the real risk of complacency. And so we watch very closely. New Mexico's had 2 cases. We've done a number of investigations in Texas, mainly in horses and some in bulls. We get some false positive tests in bulls that are being exported. Their semen's being exported. We have not found VS. So far in Texas, there's 1 quarantine premise in New Mexico. Usually when they get it, we get a case or 2. So far we have not. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get a case, and so that premise will be quarantined. We'll do our traces. There's actually a rule later for y'all to consider, which is basically relaxing some requirements. Basically, we have in the past required a statement about these animals moving have never are not from a quarantine premise or area. And basically my position has been and still is that the other states, we all have effective systems to quarantine animals, and that was causing a problem for our slaughter cattle primarily. They were coming in on a health certificate without the statement, which made them in violation of our rules. And I don't really want to file on them. It's not that big of a deal because I trust Dave Fly. I trust New Mexico to manage this, and so it's unnecessary. And that's why, if you're wondering, you've actually got a proposal to pass a rule no longer requiring that at the time we have VS, because I think the system's working and it's an unnecessary burden. And if we can reduce our rules and regulations at any time, we should do that. So that's the concept there. I have TB down, and I'm going to let Dr. Swartz give you the update. We do have an infected herd. The only thing I'll say there, and Andy's been out there. He was out there, and Dick, you were out there too, right? Commissioner Winters actually went out there with some wildlife surveillance. The good news is it looks like we don't have that, and we don't have an outbreak, a widespread TB across the state. You do have a calf ranch rule on TB that's going to be considered later. And TB is an ongoing risk, and we don't take it lightly. It's a significant issue. But I'm going to let Andy give you the details on the one infected herd. And on the calf ranch, I want to thank Commissioner Balma for input and help with that. And he may, when that rule comes up, may want to speak. And I don't know if Darren Turley's in the room, but Darren from Texas Association of Dairymen is also instrumental, and we just there is a higher risk in baby dairy calves, especially bull calves, from many sources and especially from out of state, and so we're trying to codify a process to give us authority to evaluate that risk epidemiologically. We already do that with hogs, for example. We evaluate hogs for risk. Have you been with wild hogs? You know, where'd you get these? Are you feeding garbage? Different things. And so this is attempting to kind of do the same thing with dairy calf ranches, especially the ones that are bottle fed, is give our employees the ability to go ask some questions and develop some working knowledge of that outfit, and then our epi and our vet staff will evaluate, is there any risk here? And that's the only reason to do that, is to protect the dairy industry in advance. If there's high risk factors, then we can get in there and talk to them. That rule is, I think it's going to be a good thing for us. Emergency management-wise, Amanda Bernhardt is our emergency coordinator, and she's actually in San Antonio today teaching a class to the state responders down there for the Texas Department of Division of Emergency Management. I'm proud of what we've done. I've sent y'all some emails over the weekend showing you some of the pictures from the media event. The governor was there and very complimentary, and met some of our staff and knows us. And we participated in a exercise in April over at Texas A&M with Texas Task Force 1, which is a Forest Service response. It's like the A-team or the SWAT team that were going into disaster. The vet school has an emergency response component that, in theory, originally was just to take care of their working dogs that hunt for bodies and humans and all, but we've expanded that to work on animals. And Dr. Perinsky is our staff vet. She's actually embedded in that and responds as part of the Task Force 1 unit. We had an exercise, our regular folks exercised with them and had a very successful exercise, just learn how to work and get along. And so I want to brag on that. We taught 3 classes at the state emergency response class our staff did, and there were over 3,000 people there. And we are a leader for emergency animal health. We're the lead agency, and we help write the plans and help train the folks out there. And I think we're doing it with the limited staff. We're doing well. This will be one of the positions that we probably will look to hire back first. We've gone from 4 emergency management people to 1. And it's just truthfully overwhelming. And so I think by this fall, we're going to probably post an assistant emergency management coordinator, trying to get somebody back on here to help, because there's too much going on. The obligations are there. We did have some close calls and real calls of tornadoes, and Commissioner Morales' field yard was just barely missed by a tornado, and there was an impact in Divine. The veterinarian there had his house destroyed, and our field staff has responded for a number of tornadoes so far. And the first thing we do is go in and look to see if there's impact to animals or the animal health infrastructure, and see what we can do to help. And so we have been out, besides exercises, we are responding. And the last thing I'll mention there is something that's kind of a personal vision of mine, is I want to reinvigorate our agency's role as we don't have satellite dishes and drones and laser beams, but we've got cowboys and horses, and I want to get us back to where, if there's a need for a horseback thing, whatever it is, rescue or surveillance or catch a cow on the road, I want to try and make sure that resource is available for the state. So partnering with USDA, they're tick riders who are really good cowboys, and we've got some really good cowboys. We're going to codify a process that next time there's a Hurricane Ike, besides working with TSCRA and ICA and the other private organizations, we're going to try and have some guys there with horses if needed to catch and do things. And the truth is, when we do this, they may start out looking for a cow, but it's inevitable that they'll be asked to go out in the woods and look for a body, or go pick up the piece of the space shuttle or whatever. So again, this is just another piece in the cog of the state response. Our challenge is to figure out a way to do it legally and safely and responsibly, and horses are private property. But by this summer, I'm going to have a process to where if we have a hurricane this year, you may see Animal Health Commission folks there, 2 of them on horses, trying to get something off the road, because public safety on the roadway is huge, and we need to get, if there's cattle or horses on there. So
Bonnie's family over there.
yeah.
They're riding
Yeah.
ropers.
There you go. So I'll end there. A couple of things left. Chronic wasting disease, separate agenda item, so I'll reserve my remarks for that till later in the meeting. And pyroplasmosis, I left it off. Dr. Schwartz is going to cover that, but it's a significant issue for us. And I may have some remarks when Andy talks about pyro, but I'm going to let him take the lead on that. So finish up my discussion with waivers. I had 3 official waivers, 2 that I approved and 1 that I denied. One of them was a guy with a pyropositive horse that wanted to move it down the road about 3 or 4 miles, and we just told him no. There wasn't any horses around where he wanted to go, but there was the potential the neighbors could put horses back, and we just didn't want to have to go through trying to talk to him and make him promise they'd never put a horse in there, and we just told him no, you got to leave it where it's at. The other 2 were trick related, which are fairly common issues, and actually part of the working group we may work on a process to where these don't necessarily have to be a formal waivers in the future. But one was some virgin bulls that wanted to come back in. They were virgin bulls that we knew were virgins because they'd been in a bull test station. But they were technically eligible by our rules for a trig test. And another one was a guy that has a place in both states, wanted to bring his bulls back to his own pasture and have his own vet do it in Texas rather than have it done in the other state. And both times I said okay, and they were tested upon arrival within 10 days. Started to put down here for you guys next meeting possible rules, and again, these are just ideas. Some of them are the same ones from last time. You can look over that. You can see we're going to have, I'm sure we'll have some trick rules for y'all to consider. Some of these other ones just continue to talk with the industry and folks about it. I've got Yellowstone written in here because I forgot to put it on there. I think elk hybrids and the elk issue in general, CWD may have to refine some rules. And so anyway, those are just ideas. I've always got a list of things that need to be talked to, and the way it works is the next step would be for me to get with the appropriate commissioners and industry folks and kind of troubleshoot these before they come before you guys. But I'll stop there and answer any questions y'all might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Do I have a second? Been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the executive director period January 24th, 2012 through June 5th, 2012. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. So Dr. Schwartz is next to give his presentation on animal health program activities, item 4. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's an honor to be here giving this report. As Dr. Ellis said, I want to focus most of my report on the TB-affected beef cattle herd we've discovered in Coke County, just north of San Angelo this year. The ranch was calling some of their beef cattle. They sent some over, consigned some cows, 23 cattle directly to San Angelo Pack. The normal meat inspection process there detected a lymph node in the lung of one of the cows that was suspicious of TB. It looked like TB. They collected that tissue, sent it to the lab, and the lab initially thought it was another infection, not TB, but when the culture came back, it was positive for tuberculosis. That particular animal was not wearing any identification other than the plant tag that was put on at the plant, but fortunately it was a direct consignment, so we thought we had a solid trace back to the ranch of origin. So our personnel sprung into action immediately, met with the ranch personnel, have been very cooperative throughout the whole process, started talking with them about where the cow may have come from, and set up herd testing. We did test all of the cattle belonging to the ranch in Coke County, and they also had cattle in Sterling County as well. And we found 2 additional cattle through that testing process that were affected. So we're working on looking at the possible source of infection for that herd. And the first place we'd look is is a purchased addition? Could they have bought the infection into the herd? And the herd was put together in 2003 and 2004, so 8-9 years ago through a local livestock market. So and we'll be working on going back to the source herds through the records. Granted, it's almost 10 years ago now, 9 years ago, and but I think the records are good enough that we'll be able to go back to some of those herds of origin. So we look at the source of infection. Could it be purchased? Could it be spread from an adjacent herd? So we're testing the adjacent herds of cattle to see if there might be TB there. It turns out that one of the adjacent landowners grazed some Mexico origin cattle, inbranded cattle, for the last 3 years, and so that certainly got our attention there. Although there weren't any inbranded cattle there now, they actually diverted some loads of cattle that were coming in this year that were to be released on, grazed on the ranch. They took them to a different place while this TB testing was going on. Another thing that caught our attention is this particular strain of TB that was isolated from these cattle matches the genetic fingerprint of organism found in Minnesota in deer and cattle. So that made us concerned. Did we have a link to that Minnesota outbreak, largely from 2005 to 2008? So we traced the records of all the cattle we had identification on, and none of them traced back to Minnesota. That doesn't mean there's not a cow in there that couldn't have come from Minnesota and they just lost our tag and has no traceability in that regard. But that's something we want to look at as well. So, and as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we had some concern because the strain matched a wildlife strain in another state. We were concerned that could we have a wildlife reservoir in the area as well. So we teamed up, made a joint effort with 2 branches of USDA, with the veterinary services and primarily with the wildlife services. That's the trappers that we're all familiar with, the animal damage control people, and with Texas A&M University and with Texas Parks and Wildlife as well. So it was a joint effort. We went out and sampled wildlife on the ranch and got permission from the landowners in that area. And Commissioner Winters took 2 days out of his life to come out there, and we really appreciate the support he showed. And got out there and sweated with us a little bit. I think it had 100 degrees that day we were out there. So it was interesting, but the good news was, as you've already heard from Dr. Ellis, we did not find tuberculosis in the wildlife. We'll continue doing some surveillance through hunter-harvested deer into the fall and through some predator control that Wildlife Services is doing. We would have liked to have seen, been able to sample some coyotes, because we've learned from experience of researchers in Michigan primarily that coyotes can be a good surveillance animal. They can catch those deer that are sick and contract TB that way, and you can catch the coyote or sample the coyote and in effect be sampling 8 or 10 deer, the equivalent of 8 or 10 deer. Unfortunately, we were not, they definitely did due diligence to finding the coyotes, but just could not, and that's, I guess, testimony to the effectiveness of their predator control they've been doing in that area. There's some sheep and goat herds and have some complaints about some coyotes in the area, but I think the trappers are doing a good job controlling that population. So where are we on this herd? It's in the past, in previous years, up until say 3 years ago, USDA was able to just almost automatically offer indemnity for these TB affected herds. As you recall, the last affected dairy we had in the San Angelo area, it was in the San Angelo area by chance, different strain of TB, but we were not able to offer indemnity to that dairy. They just basically folded due to financial reasons and sold out. We were not able to indemnify them. Now USDA is doing a risk assessment on those TB affected herds and looking at the cost of testing a herd out of a quarantine versus buying it out. And because this was a relatively small herd, only 92 head of beef cattle, and because the cattle were older, not worth that much on the market anymore, they were the model predicted that the cost savings, or the cheapest route for the government to go, would be to indemnify that herd. So the herd owners agreed verbally to that offer, and we're making the arrangements now to get those cattle sent to slaughter. We've got a little bit of concern about how the testing is performed, because as I told you earlier, that initial cow, the lab did not think it was TB, but it cultured positive on 2 of the premise reactors that we found. One was negative, or actually both of them were negative on our blood TB test, but responders on the skin test. So, but we took them out of the herd anyway because it was a trace. Normally we'd classify those animals negative and let them go, but because we had a direct trace, we necropsied them and found TB in 2 of those animals. And so that's got us a little bit worried that the strain might be behaving differently. But, so we'll keep that in mind as there's one adjacent with a suspect animal. We want to get that animal out and examine it as well to make sure we're not missing TB. So that's where we are now. Within the next week or so, that herd should be going on to slaughter with indemnity.
Andy,
Yes, go ahead.
You tested those cattle, you did it for cervical, a caudal fold and a blood test, or did you just do a blood test on?
We did the 2 tests in parallel. We
Okay.
injected them with the caudal fold, and then 3 days later, when we read the caudal fold, we drew blood for gamma interferon and ran it at our test. And the feeling was we'd increase the sensitivity that way, find TB if it was out there, and we did. It worked. So it's just we examined our laboratory procedure to make sure we didn't miss, do something wrong on the blood, but we've got quality controls built into that gamma interferon. We've got a way of testing that sample to make sure there's white blood cells present, through the pokeweed mitogen, and those samples both tested well. You have to get it to the lab within 30 hours, and we did that, took good care of the samples. So the sensitivity of the blood test is in the mid-80s, about 85%. So we know we're going to miss some. The caudal fold is not much better, about 88%. So we felt like running those in parallel would increase our sensitivity.
And you got a false negative on the blood samples.
Yes, actually on
It had
2
been
animals.
cultured positive.
Right. So on one of those animals, it was caudal. Both of the 2 that I'm talking about were on the ranch. They were caudal fold positive, negative on the gamma interferon. On the necropsy, one of our veterinarians saw, Dr. Pete Fincher saw a TB-like lesion in the lymph node of the lung. The second animal, they saw nothing on the gross necropsy, but they still did a pooled culture of those tissues and were able to culture the organism. So either it was early infection or it was just in a part of the lymph node that was not examined or whatever. But we would miss even that second cow on the premise on the gross necropsy. I think it's a testament to the difficulty of diagnosing a chronic disease like this. It just over time it would eat up that cow and it would be easy to find it. But if you're getting a herd where there's recently exposed animals and probably not enough time to develop those lesions, I think it's just harder to pick it out. And that to me is why it's good to just get that herd off the books, to take care of the owner with some indemnity, but just get it sent to slaughter and basically start over. And the herd owner's been extremely cooperative as well as the neighbors. Did you?
That genetic fingerprint coming from Minnesota, have you found that same anywhere else?
The only other place that they found that genetic fingerprint is in a Nebraska feedlot, and that was an animal that came from Minnesota to that feedlot. So, what we believe though is that the source of that Minnesota outbreak could have been Canada, it could have been Mexico, it could have been just laying out in Minnesota for a long time. But we know that we don't have a complete database of all the strains of TB out there in the U.S. even, much less Mexico. So, with those inbreeded animals grazing next door, that's in my mind, that's where, the most likely source. The second most likely is that they bought it, bought a cow that got exposed years ago before she got into that herd. The third or least likely thing is it's in the wildlife, or it's some deer that got moved into the state illegally, from a state that had TB and brought it in. So I'm trying to rule out all those possibilities.
They think it's not an uncommon strain in Mexico, actually, and it could have been introduced many years ago. It's a Mexican feeder introduction that's jumped into the deer in Minnesota. And some of the experts, Bob Myers, some of those guys don't think it's that rare in other parts of the United States or in Mexico. It's just kind of a coincidence to the Minnesota deal.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
And I think we'll always continue to look for wildlife, but I think we would have all been surprised if we would have found it. And Andy's right, though. The wild card in this wildlife linkage is man. and we're going to talk about that in the chronic wasting disease. But yeah, smuggled deer probably pose a bigger risk to us than just kind of happens, and so we're gonna have to always look for that, even if we don't think it's a reality. And it's going to also lead to the reason that we need to work closely with Parks and Wildlife from now on, because they're aware more than we are of bad guys that might be doing things and have drop-off points for deer and places like that. So it's this TB deer cattle issue. It's kind of all come together, and we're going to have to work from now on. It'll be a partnership, like Andy's mentioned.
We've yet to find a TB case in a deer in Texas.
You what?
We haven't found a
No.
TB case in a deer in Texas.
Absolutely. And I don't really think we have it, to be quite honest with you, in Texas now, but we're going to be vigilant looking for it.
That was the main reason for my trying to travel down there to see, because of the potential that we have a reservoir in the deer population. From all of my conversations with all of industry and Parks and Wildlife, if it was brought in from Minnesota, it was done illegally. It certainly wasn't done under permit, and I wanted to ensure that such a diverse group was able to make what we believe to be a fair and accurate sampling of the wildlife. And I want to compliment Andy and all of the people involved. Dr. Schwartz was able to coordinate a very diverse group of people under certainly less than clinical circumstances, and did a darn fine job. We had a very good collection, good cooperation across the agencies, and I don't think that there's any way that it could have been operated any more professionally or efficiently. So thank you, and thank you for letting me participate, because I feel very comfortable that the wildlife reservoir is not responsible in this particular instance. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So just wrap up that discussion by saying, regarding the fingerprint of that organism, that I won't pretend to understand all they do to do the genetic fingerprinting, but they did an assay called oligotyping, and that tells you basically what the cousins of that TB strain is. They plan to do sequence the entire genome of our isolate and from some of the Minnesota isolates, and they'll be able to compare that in detail and tell us if it really is that closely related or not. And those results should be out in a couple months or so from NPSL. So there'll probably be more to this story later. So. Switching gears on you, I'm still on tuberculosis now, but on a completely separate investigation involving a cow processed at another San Angelo slaughter plant, at Lone Star Beef Processing. This particular cow was not wearing identification either, but the difficulty on this case was she was not a direct consignment. She was in the middle of a consignment from two different slaughter buyers from Oklahoma, one from Oklahoma, one from Northeast Texas. And so we had to sort through all the cattle they had bought in the recent week and consign to that slaughter plant, and try to determine what's the most likely herd of origin based on the carcass weight and kill sheet and all. And there were some mistakes made on the brucellosis test chart, the 454 from that slaughter plant. It was obviously out of order. It could not be accurate based on the slaughter plant record. So we chose to follow the money, basically follow who got paid for that animal and get back. And we believe we've traced it back to the slaughter buyer in Oklahoma. But we'll see how that goes and see if they can find a possible herd of origin there. But it may wrap back into Texas because of the trading circles there. Even if it did trace back to the Oklahoma guy, he may have bought the cow in Texas. So that story, I think we'll have another chapter later.
Market cattle?
Yes, they were purchased through market. Some in the country, some through markets. And but the cow was not wearing identification, so there's no way to know for sure where she came from. What we're always concerned about is if we trace back and we think we have the herd of origin and we test it, or we test a whole group, a series of herds, and don't find TB, then we're concerned, are we looking in the wrong place, or did we just miss it on the test, or what? So we've got to do a thorough investigation there. So, switching on you now to the next disease, brucellosis testing. I'll just say briefly that we do the same sort of tracing with the brucellosis reactors that we're finding through slaughter establishments, and if we've got a way to trace it to a herd of origin, we can go in surgically and just test that herd and rule out possible infected herd. We ran into a case in Northeast Texas where a slaughter buyer bought cattle from 13 different consigners at a livestock market. When they hit the Florida plant, the identification, there was no identification on that animal. We just had to go back on to all the consigners that made up part of that order, and we're ending up testing 13 different herds of origin, possible herds of origin in Northeast Texas because of we just don't know where that cow came from. We looked at breed records, carcass weights, anything that we could try to limit the number of herds we had to test, but it's just, that's as low as we could go with the denominator. It was 13 herds in that case. So those producers are being asked to gather their cattle so we can get them tested. Another cattle project we're working on, I told you a little bit about this before, is Enhanced Passive Surveillance Project, and this is a new concept. It's just a pilot project this year, and it's a way of detecting disease through observing animals either on hoof or at slaughter plants and reporting a rise in any certain condition like weight loss or diarrhea, and it's a way of detecting disease through observation rather than direct animal testing. And we started this at the end of January, so we're about 5-6 months into the project, and we're doing it at 14 different livestock markets across the state. And it seems to be going well. We're in discussions with USDA about continuing the project into next year. And it ties in with some surveillance streams that are coming in from veterinary practitioners who are out looking at the animals, and from diagnostic labs and from some slaughter plants. So it's just a different concept that USDA is looking into, and we're glad to take part in that project. Speaking briefly about swine, we've joined in an effort with USDA Veterinary Services and some other states to look at a different sampling scheme for swine brucellosis and pseudorabies, and it's based on PIN tags or premise identification tags, and we've agreed to look for those tags in the pig samples that we're testing, and if we do, we'll report them into that system. And it's a way, if the pilot works, my understanding is they would be able to look at those samples and decide at the lab whether or not to test them or not, and that way save some dollars on the testing cost. So it's a pilot program that we're participating in. Switching now to equine piroplasmosis. Since the last meeting of the commission, we have released one pyro-affected horse that was successfully treated by a veterinarian, by a private practitioner, using the Agriculture Research Service protocol, the Don Knowles protocol, with Metacarb, 4 injections IM. And they followed up on this horse with repeated testing, and it's gone negative on every test we can throw at it, basically. The antibody test, the PCR test, and even a Western blot that was developed specifically to try to detect horses, to determine if they've cleared or not. And so it's met all the criteria, based on what we found out through treatment efforts on King Ranch horses and some other horses around the state. We feel confident that that horse really was cleared of infection. So at USHA last fall, we were helped push forward a proposal or a resolution through the Infectious Diseases of Horses Committee that would ask USDA to issue a national policy on releasing these treated horses that have gone negative. And we've been promised an answer by the meeting this fall. I believe we're in North Carolina again this fall in October. So hopefully we'll know, but some other states, California, and I'm not sure if Oklahoma has, but I know California's released several treated horses that have
New Mexico
gone negative.
did too.
New Mexico did as well. So.
And I'll just throw in here, Andy's one of the national experts on this, and is it next week? I've asked him to go. We had a call with Louisiana, the Racing Commission, and they had some questions and issues with pyro, and we're going to have Dr. Swartz go to Louisiana and actually speak at their Racing Commission upcoming meeting to talk to them about how we're doing pyro processes in Texas. And so I think that's just part of being good neighbors. I was in New Mexico at the livestock board meeting they had in March, and I think it was very rewarding. May in the future see if any of those guys want to come over and just introduce themselves to y'all. It's really interesting to see how it works. But Andy, when are you may want to mention to them what you're going to do. Is it 2 weeks? I'm not sure when you're going.
I think it's June 18th or June 18th. That's what the racing commission is meeting and asked if we would come over and discuss what we've done with this horse and explain to them, because we have some insight or some, more depth of knowledge than any other state, because there have been almost 200 horses treated in our state. We're able to follow those results and get some confidence. So they've asked us to come over and speak to the racing commission and explain what we've done with this horse and if they need to have any concern over allowing that horse back on the track, which we don't think they should, but we'll get a chance to go over maybe and explain that. So thank you, Dr. Ellis. I would say that the rate of new cases of pyro that we're finding, in other words, newly infected horses that we're finding overall has gone down in the last year as horse populations have been tested going to events, but we still are finding some. And earlier this year, we came across a pasture with multiple owners' horses, and there were 9 positive horses in one pasture. And so we were testing that area because we felt like it was high risk. There'd been a couple positive horses in the area, and one of them at least was used for breeding from other horses. So we decided to test this pasture and found that a number of infected horses by multiple owners. And so later on one of your agenda items is one of the proposals will be considering a high-risk area for pyroplasmosis, somewhat based on what our findings were on that multiple owners positive horses there. And that's, we can talk some more about that, I guess, when the rule comes up. I want to finish up by just mentioning that the Chronic Wasting Disease Working Group met about a month ago now, and this was a joint working group between our agency, the Animal Health Commission, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. Mitch Lockwood and I co-chair that committee, and it was formed back in 2002 when there was a lot of attention paid to CWD. We were just finding out how widespread it could be, and a plan was drafted at that time, or actually written and adopted, an emergency response plan. We had a CWD outbreak, and with recent events in New Mexico, I felt like it was time to reconvene that group and look at that plan, and we'll get into that. It's a whole separate agenda item, but I just wanted to mention that Texas Parks and Wildlife is here. Glad to have Mitch and Alan Kane and a number of other individuals from the agency here, and hopefully if any questions come up, they can help me answer them. So, Commissioner, that concludes my report.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Schwartz? Thank you. I guess you're going to stay up there. Dr. Ellis will join you, and we'll talk about CWD.
I'm just going to give some opening remarks, and then I'm going to let Andy come back. But he is the co-chair of the Parks and Wildlife Texas Animal Health Commission Task Force Working Group. I'm not sure what we call it, but anyway, I'll let Andy lead the discussion on a little more of the technical details. I just want to give you a little higher level perspective on what I see coming with CWD. And again, I'm going to try from now on, whenever there's a rule proposed, at least somewhere in the agenda, talk to you all about it for just a minute or two from my perspective, because it's really probably important that y'all hear from that. But, I think the problem with chronic wasting disease is it's inevitable. We're going to find it in Texas. I think if it's not imminent, we're going to find it when we look, because it's too close to the border not to find it. So what's the good news is, that's the bad news. The good news is we still have some time to do some planning, develop our relationships a little better with the wildlife folks and parks and the different folks involved, and come up with some prudent surveillance and control plans in advance. And so that's what's going on today. That's the beginning of these deliberations. And I wouldn't be surprised by this fall we don't find chronic wasting disease in Texas. I'm just guessing, but if I were a betting man, I'd probably bet we'll find it out there when we look. And if that's the case, then this is going to be a game changer for Texas in a lot of ways, and for this agency and our relationship with our exotic livestock industry, and the importance that we really are on our game and really have a Texas team together to manage this. And obviously Parks will handle the white-tailed deer, mule deer, and we'll handle the elk and the other species like that. But this is going to change, I think, the dynamics. It may change the people that are in this room at the next meeting. As soon as we find it, I can promise you there's going to be some folks at our meetings that have not been here before and raise the level of
Commissioner Winters' ability to pontificate in a good manner. So,
It'll be a test.
so I look to continue, my goal is to strengthen the relationship with Parks and Wildlife even better and with the industry folks, and I think we're on the right track with the meetings and the dialogue that are going on, but it's going to be clear that we have to have a speak together on this. We're going to have the same message. We're going to have to be in agreement on controlment measures and on surveillance systems. It's going to be critical that we stay together on that and make this work from the beginning, and so far I have no reason to think that's not going to happen. Really right now the threat of spreading chronic wasting disease is through man more than the deer. You know, the ecosystem out there that Andy's going to talk to you about is isolated. It's in far west Texas and just certain mountains. And those mule deer probably would never end up in South Texas or East Texas, but men can move them around, and so that's the women too, I guess. So that's our challenge, and that's one of the reasons there's a zone specific rule for you guys to consider today, which is specific to West Texas. You know, containment zone and high-risk zone, and I'm not sure these are the right words. Maybe we need to change the name at some point. To me, the containment zone is the quarantine zone, and a high-risk is outside that. It's really a buffer zone, but it doesn't matter what you call them. The truth is, because of the rulemaking process, we're bringing to you today a specific rule for West Texas because of the threat of these mule deer that are closely related, and they go back and forth in the mountains across the state line. But next meeting of y'all, the next meeting, you may see a rule come back that's more generic, and it's actually going to be more similar to the PIRO rule. You're looking at a rule today in PIRO which just says the commission can define a zone of high risk. It's similar to the TB calf ranch rule that you're going to look at. It just says the commission can do some epidemiologic things and determine this is a high risk area or practice. So I think we're in a hurry today. You're going to look at a zone rule, but we may come back and need just a process to define high risk for chronic wasting disease wherever it may occur, whether that's a containment zone or the buffer zone around it. So just be prepared. But today you're having specific geographic considerations. So one of the things on there for sure, and it's just a way the rulemaking is set up, in my opinion, there needs to be a difference in the containment zone, the little circle, and then the outer circle, which is the high risk or the buffer zone. And one of the ways that we're going to encourage comments is on movement with the process of status. And I feel strongly that if we're going to have a status program, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year statuses, and the Animal Health Commission maintains status programs for about 400 white-tailed deer in the Western Park system. If we're going to have a status program, we have to trust it. That's my opinion. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. So I'm comfortable that after due deliberation, if the comments come in, that the outer zone, a deer could move out of there with 3 year status rather than 5 year status. It's okay. But we put it 5, so if the comments say they wanted 5, it can stay that way. But if we put it 3 and then the comments said 5, you'd have to come back and start over, because you can lessen a rule upon passage but not increase it. So you're going to see 5 and 5, but the truth is we're encouraging comments about having no deer would come out of a containment zone with that 5 year status in the zone, but if for the buffer zone, 3 years may be good enough. And so I want to just make that point. Be sure and take a look at that. And Commissioner Winters and Andy and folks may have comments, and we'll certainly look for the written comments. I think what this is going to do later this year, and the U.S. Animal Health meeting this fall in North Carolina is going to be probably more important than ever. This is a new, I think by this fall there'll be a federal rule out. I think it's entirely possible we'll have CWD in Texas. If not, I'm still going to bet you we get it. And so, well, how does that affect y'all? I'm predicting that the agency's involvement with elk, red deer, cycad deer, elk hybrids is going to become more significant, more debatable, more heated, more urgent, and I'm just kind of being a soothsayer there. That we had a lot of trouble getting surveillance systems established for the elk, and as y'all know, we put those rules in abeyance for a year and asked for people to volunteer. And last January, we kind of got mean, said, all right, we're through playing around. I think we have 7 or 8 elk people that have signed up in our surveillance program, which means everyone else in the state with elk, however many that is, they're not in our surveillance program, which means legally they're not supposed to move elk. Our rules, you may have seen earlier where I mentioned there, we immediately found out, well, there's elk hybrids that are not covered, Sika deer, cross, red deer. There are a number of folks in the state that maybe just switched to red deer from elk or said they did. And weren't really ready to pick that fight, and I'm still not ready to do that. But I think the disclosure about a month ago of a red deer infected herd in Minnesota basically puts us on notice. We're going to have to take some consideration of that within the next year or so. I'm not saying it'll even be on the next commission, because I think I'd like to go to USHA and listen to the national dialogue on red deer after that disclosure. But it was actually a captive herd that had surveillance, and they're trying to figure out, but there's no question anymore the red deer are susceptible. That's a species that commission would regulate, and our rules do not address it. So just mentioning that somewhere down the road we're going to have to revisit that. And I'm not really looking forward to that. And right now, let's focus on elk, but I think that's coming. I just want to finish up by thanking Carter Smith, Parks and Wildlife Executive Director, and Mitch and Clayton and the folks, the staff over there. They've been great so far, and I want to thank the industry for that are going to speak. Some of them are here going to speak. That so far, this process has really gone as well as you can expect for something new. Part of it's because we haven't diagnosed it yet. It's going to get a little more urgent if we find it. So I'm really happy that we're having these deliberations in advance and giving us some due diligence. So I'll stop there. Dr. Swartz is our agency lead on the Joint Task Force Working Group with Parks. He's going to give you a short presentation on what is CWD and why is it significant, what are we talking about in the rule that you're going to be considered. I think there's only 10 slides or whatever, so y'all can look at this screen or that screen, and that's for the audience as well. And I'll ask Andy to come back up. But those are my thoughts on it, but I think this is going to become a routine part of this commission agenda, and it could get interesting, so just stay tuned.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. So Baby and I are going to try to coordinate our presentation here. So I just wanted to, as Dr. Ellis said, tell you a little bit about the disease. I think everybody in the room probably knows what chronic wasting disease is, but talk about it in light of what we're proposing with the rule today. So the question is, what is CWD? And these are an animal that's affected. It literally causes chronic wasting of the animal. So the animal progressively develops signs over a period of months and ultimately dies. There's no treatment for this disease. It's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. So that means it's a disease that can be transmitted from one animal to another, and it causes holes in the brain, basically. And have susceptible species, and there's a list of these species as well. And it's characterized, as we've said, by weight loss and eventual death. Okay. We know that the disease can be transmitted naturally between a number of different species: white-tailed deer, mule deer, black-tailed deer, elk. And a significant addition to that list, as Dr. Ellis has already said, is red deer. So up until this time, red deer had never been infected in the wild. I mean, there had been some experimentally infected, but never, I say in the wild, that's naturally. These were in a pen and are monitored herd with more than 10-year status, and they found an affected doe in that pen. So it's very significant. Sika deer have been added to the list just recently. So we'll address those. Right now, our current entry requirements don't we don't require monitoring status on red deer coming into the state. So that's something I think we'll need to look at fairly quickly. As Dr. Ellis said, we'll wait and see what the rest of the states are doing at USHA. But today we could have red deer coming into the state without any CWD monitoring status. So I think we're probably leaving the door open there that we should shut fairly quickly. The good news is it's not transmissible to other livestock or humans. And so there's a similar disease, a TSE of sheep called scrapie that a lot of you have heard about. That's not the same disease at all. It's just a similar disease, but it's not the same at all. And a human disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, or CJD, that's not related to this either. So what would you see in an animal that's affected with CWD? Initially, you would see a skinny animal, emaciation, listlessness, droopy head and ears. They tend to hang around the water source. They salivate excessively and just kind of walk randomly, in circles. They get out and get hit on the road. They get caught by predators because they're not the strongest animal in the herd anymore. One thing that makes this disease a little more difficult to deal with is a long incubation period from exposure till clinical signs develop is 2 to 4 years. The life of say a white-tailed deer is somewhere in a mule deer is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 years. But if they have the disease, it shortens their lifespan to about 1.5 years. So it doesn't take that long to kill them, but death is inevitable once they contract the disease. We know that the disease can be spread from animal to animal, and that would be through shedding of the prion. I mean, the prion is basically a piece of protein. It's not a bacteria, it's a virus. It's a piece of protein that's normally in an animal's brain and spinal cord. And for some reason we don't understand, it gets folded in an abnormal way, and that makes it where the body is unable to address. That's a supportive cell for the central nervous system, and it actually causes a cell to die because those folded protein can't be processed properly. So we know that the prion from CWD is shed in all bodily fluids. So it's in feces, it's in urine, it's in saliva, and so it gets into the environment. We know that in the environment, the prion remains infectious for years. We know that around feed and water sources in the soil where susceptible animals have been kept, they've had infected animals, removed those animals, and kept it vacant for more than a year and put susceptible animals back in, and the new animals introduced to that area came down with the disease. So this is a bad disease to deal with once it gets established. Hence all the efforts to try to prevent that spread into the state. So what are the impacts of having CWD? We know that over time it will spread from animal to animal in increasing numbers. There have been some states that reported in excess of 40% of the animals are infected in different populations. And there's some evidence that over time, when the prevalence gets that high, that hunters are reluctant to go in and hunt those animals that might be affected. So although there's no human health issue that we know of, there's still a concern that we may not have all the answers. So when it reaches a certain critical point in the hunter's mind, they quit hunting that population. That could have a big impact on a big industry in our state, the hunting industry. So I should stop here and give credit to Texas Parks and Wildlife. They put together these excellent graphics and shared them with us. It makes my presentation a lot easier. What you're seeing now is where CWD has been found in North America. So the gray areas is where CWD has been found in free-ranging populations, and the circle areas that are areas. The idea is that there would be mandatory inspection in coming out of the containment zone. There would not be any permits issued to move live deer through the Triple T or DMP permits, and any new deer breeder facilities that were established in the area would not be permitted to contain deer, basically permitted to have 0 deer present. But we intend to have an increased surveillance effort in that region, and the way it would be accomplished is by communicating with TxDOT, with DPS, with other folks who are out on the road, and to call Parks and Wildlife or call us if they find some roadkill animals to test, and so we hope that will step up our surveillance as well. I think Parks and Wildlife is planning on doing some purpose-oriented trips, or at least on their way to visit landowners or management areas in that area, would look for some roadkill animals as well to try to increase their surveillance. There's also some surveillance plan calls for some targeted surveillance, as I said, like on those alfalfa fields and some areas where with total permission, they have to have permission of the landowners and the adjacent landowners, so we don't go in and kill somebody's population of animals that they're trying to sell hunts on. But the idea would be to get some sampling in that area quickly and see what we've got.
Would we have personnel to go to a ranch, if, say they have a hunt during the mule deer season and they have 10 hunters and they all shoot, would we go to that location and pull the brain stems on those deer?
That's something we could consider with the limitations that Dr. Ellis just spelled out with personnel. But I mean, if we shake someone loose, some of that surveillance would be done by Parks and Wildlife personnel as well. I mean, they've got biologists here trained on collection, but I'd say if we can get into a situation like that, we'd certainly take advantage of it.
I know they had personnel at that Trans-Pecos contest for a couple of years and pulled brain stems.
Remember, this will be a program that is implemented and operated in full and complete cooperation with Parks and Wildlife. This will be a shared responsibility depending upon where we by statute overlap and do not overlap, but this is being done with the understanding that we will all be working together because it is for the benefit of the state in its entirety. So there's not going to be a lot of territorial concern about this.
Thank you, Commissioner. And it'll be, public information is a very important part of this. If we can get the hunting population or those people that care about our wildlife populations to buy into the idea that we need more surveillance to protect the population, then that will go a long way toward getting those numbers up. So let me go to the last slide I've got. This is the high-risk zone, and that the terminology may be a little confusing. I've talked about the containment zone. That's where the disease is most likely. This is a high-risk zone. It's higher risk than the rest of the state, basically, is the way I think about it. And we would have a similar requirement in this region. So CWD susceptible cervids can only move from herds that have a 5-year status. As Dr. Ellis said, at the wish of the commission, we may be able to allow a 3-year status. So allow movement based on a 3-year monitoring status. That's in our, not movement qualified under Parks and Wildlife program, but in a 3-year CWD monitored herd status under our program. The deer check stations would be voluntary, and there would be some trapping and transport allowed if there's sufficient surveillance in that area, and that would be, the proposal says testing at least 300 white-tailed deer and mule deer. So that's a lot of animals to test, but that would give a high level of confidence that there's not disease present. It would be in the neighborhood. I believe we determined it would be 95% confidence of detecting 1% level of infection. So pretty high level of confidence in order to allow movement of the trapped deer. And again, increased surveillance in this part of the state as well. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're going to let Mitch talk now for parks. Everyone else will talk when the rule comes up. It's not up. Mitch, why don't you just go ahead and put him on the spot. He wasn't prepared to talk. So maybe just give a 1 minute on parks perspective.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Mitch Lockwood. I'm the Big Game Program Director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And I just want to say that I'm very pleased, very proud, and thankful for the relationship that Texas Parks and Wildlife and Texas Animal Health Commission have. We've had for my whole career, but I've seen strengthen some even over the years, quite a bit actually. And getting to work quite a bit with Dr. Hensley, who's now moved on, and of course Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Ellis, Commissioner Winters is very active, and that's very much appreciated. As Andy said, this is we've kind of dusted off this CWD response plan that was written about a decade ago, and turned out it needed a little bit more than just a little tweak here and there. It needed a major facelift because we have learned a lot about this disease in the last 10 years. But as Dr. Schwartz just shared, there's still a lot of unknowns. But nonetheless, we have basically rewritten it. Both agencies have been involved. We're to the point now, in fact, this week, where we expect to punt this plan out to this CWD task force, primarily a group of who we consider wildlife health professionals, private, state, and federal veterinarians, and some producers, some elk producers, as well as some deer breeders. One thing that I think Dr. Schwartz covered that's pretty interesting is this is a what I consider to be an unprecedented situation. It's pretty Granted, a very small sample size that we're dealing with because New Mexico, quite frankly, hasn't done much surveillance. Appears to be very high prevalence, at least in that small area, at least at that scale for that Game Management Unit 28, which is Fort Bliss. And on that map that we saw, in fact, I might be able to, can this go back, Andy, or is it over?
Can you go back?
If we go back to that map showing, one more. Right here. This is Fort Bliss. I think, yeah, here's my pointer. This Game Management Unit. So what you see here basically is 8. It may look like 7. No, you
Mitch.
see 8.
If we can get it up there, nobody back there can see the map.
Okay, that'd be good. We have those 8 positives, just to clarify, were not all from this past year, but they started surveillance in this Game Management Unit in 2007, 2008. And I personally wasn't aware of any positives until we got the call in February of this past year when they tested. They had a total of 10 hunter-killed deer in Game Management Unit 28 or Fort Bliss. And of those 10, they tested 7 because it's all voluntary testing. There it is on the big screen. It was. But it's all voluntary testing, and they tested 7 out of those 10, and they detected CWD in 4 of those 7 hunter-harvested mule deer, which is unprecedented. All of these that you see here are mule deer positives, but there are some elk positives here at Game Management Unit 34 in the Sacramentos. What we don't know at this time is how many positives and how many have been tested. New Mexico has shown a lot of interest in partnering with us, but quite frankly, they have an agency about the size of Texas Animal Health Commission. They're stretched very thin, and so it's been hard to get them to sit down and compile all the data and share it. So we've just made arrangements to go meet with them in about a month and get all the details. But y'all may remember back about a decade ago, here in the Oregon Mountains on the east side was where the first positive was, and then we really didn't hear much about it until these popped up. So this is a lot of interest to us, but not only this, but the fact that there's been virtually no surveillance in this area, and with a hotbed that those Sacramento Mountains seem to be in their relationship to the Guadalupe Mountains is a big reason why we have an interest to do some increased surveillance in that area in the near future. Because of the 624 positives that start over. Of the 624 mule deer and whitetail deer, primarily whitetail deer that have been tested in the Trans-Pecos region of the state, hunter or wild deer, very few have come from this area north of 62-180. There's a lot of the Trans-Pecos that dips down below I-10 there that we're not seeing here, and then Pecos and Terrell counties, and that's where the bulk of those samples came from. And so we do have, obviously, a lot of interest to try to do a more targeted approach, surveillance in that area. But again, I thank y'all very much for considering this and for the partnership that we have, the cooperation. I think we've got a great team, and I look forward to some more work with Andy and Dr. Ellis ahead. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
That's a pretty good sized elk herd in the Guadalupes, and I've seen them all the way down in the Delawares too. So.
Relatively speaking, it is a pretty good size. It's the interesting thing about why we have so few samples of just mule deer and virtually no elk from that area, not that our department's collected, is because relatively speaking, not only are there few animals, but then there's fewer harvested, and then the ones that are harvested you got to find either at the sack and pack filling up on their truck or at a locker plant. There aren't many locker plants in that part of the state. And so it's just been very, very, very difficult to get our hands on these samples out there. We try getting road kills. We work with the county and DPS to call us, and we just don't get many.
Coyotes eat them before you get to them.
I reckon so, yes.
Out there.
Exactly right.
Mitch, thank you very much. I look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you, Chairman.
We also have some comment from Dr. Bob Dittmar. He's a private practitioner and is also on this committee. Bob, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank Thank you, Commissioner Morales. I'm Bob Ditmar, I'm a private practitioner in Kerrville. I serve on the task force. I'm going to start off apologizing. I have a vocal cord problem, so if y'all can't understand me, just ask me to repeat it. Just a couple of things. As I was sitting back here, was jotting some notes, one of the things that we talked about earlier, and it kind of came up a while ago, was we did talk about including all susceptible cervids. That wasn't a hard and fast thing, but I think that's something the commission needs to think about. And my question has been for a long time, when does a red deer become an elk? And I think that's a question that at this point in time we need to consider. I think one of the things from a practitioner standpoint and from this too that we have to look at when we're collecting some of these samples, particularly from captive herds, is that the owner provides a sample, and so we're a little bit at a loss as to what we get and what's truly there when we start talking about these facilities that are outside of this containment zone. A couple of things that concern me: we have an apparent high incident in those adjacent areas in New Mexico. There are limited testing, and Mitch talked about the Trans-Pecos, but in the future we're probably going to have to look at the Panhandle area too. There's lots of game up in that Texas, New Mexico border in the Panhandle, and from what I learned in our meeting is there's been very limited testing in New Mexico. Excuse me, up there.
I haven't reported.
I live in Kerrville, the part of the deer country of Texas. As far as chronic wasting disease in the future, I don't think there's been a natural occurrence or a model that we can look at to compare CWD2 in other states to what we might see in the Texas Hill Country as far as deer density and deer population. And I just ask you to think about that. Not what we're talking about today, but again, we have an opportunity to look into the future. I think it's also important that we look at we look at biological boundaries as opposed to political boundaries, and that's part of the reason why we took this larger area, and it seems like a large area, but if you look at that closely, there are some natural boundaries there that make sense when you look at it. And again, I would ask the commission, it's important to do the right thing, not necessarily what's the politically right thing. If you have any questions, I'd have to answer. Thank you.
If none, thank you, Bob. We have Warren and Charlie. Would you guys be okay with waiting until we get to that issue in section 9? It'll be 9A, and then I'll call you guys up. Great. Is there any other questions? Since it's not an action item, we'll move on to item 6, and presentation of laboratory updates. Good morning, Holly. Help me with how do you pronounce it correctly?
It's Poremski,
Poremski. Okay.
just like it's spelled.
Just like it's spelled. I'm always afraid to say it just like it's spelled.
Everybody stumbles over it.
All right, Dr. Poremski, thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here to talk about the laboratories today. I will try to be brief. I have only been working with our labs since January, but I have to tell you, we have some really outstanding people. And that has been by far the best part of my job the last few months, is working with the labs. So getting to know them, and so we should be very proud of them. As Dr. Ellis mentioned, we've had a lot of changes at the lab in the last few months, and ongoing changes right now. Our sample volume has decreased, and I think is continuing to decrease. Last year we had the drought, and so our sample volume was incredibly high, and so that's kind of been tapering off, and then with stopping first point testing, things are continuing to decrease. But despite that, our staff has been busy for several reasons. The first of which is we've implemented a new laboratory information management system, the LIMS system, to manage and report our results out of the labs. And the decision to move to that system was made before my time, but basically it helps us with our ability to collect the fees that we're going to be talking about in a second. And it also helped us with our other little bit of news, which is that we were accepted into the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. Going to talk some more about that, but how we manage our information and having that information secure and being able to easily report results out to our veterinarians is important to both of those processes. So We started using the new LIMS system last month. We've had a few little bumps like any kind of new computer system, but it seems to be working well. And then we've also, this week, the fees for laboratory services went into effect, and we've started using that system to do our invoicing. Over the last couple of months, we've been working closely with Bonnie and our public information department to try to get the word out about the fees and how we're going to go about collecting those fees and that whole process. And we've had lots of questions, and our lab staff has been wonderful about trying to answer all those questions. So hopefully we've gotten the word out, and I would welcome anyone to come and talk to me or Andy about if you have any detailed questions about how that's working out. But as I mentioned, our other big piece of news was that we were admitted to the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. The NALN system, it's a cooperative program between USDA, actually two different branches of USDA, and they basically accredit animal health laboratories, mostly state and university laboratories. The process of getting into the NALM system took over 2 years, so I'm now the third laboratory director, actually fourth, I guess, if you count the time that Andy was doing this part of the job before he roped me into it, that has kind of gone through this process until we finally got it done. And so I did bring just a show and tell. I brought our certificate from USDA that we were admitted into the network. And one of the big advantages, or part of the reason that this process was started when Dale Preston was director, was so that we would be able to run pseudorabies testing and run the full gamut of pseudorabies tests. And USDA requires you to be a NALM lab to be able to do that. And so we now have that ability. We're getting someone trained to do the last little bit of pseudorabies testing this month, so we'll have that done. The requirements are pretty extensive for specifically your quality management system and the processes that you have in place in your laboratory to make sure that things are consistent, that you have everybody's following the same standard operating procedures. And the documentation and the level of paperwork just astounded me. So as part of that process, we had to send some people to quality management system training. And when Dale started the process, he sent 3 people to this training. And of those 3 people, there's only one that still works for our agency, and that's Ray Molina, and he's the supervisor at our Austin lab. So I want to really acknowledge him and thank him for all of his work, because he's really come up through the ranks, started as a lab tech and is now supervising our lab, and really carried that process through with the NALM system. So thanks, Rich. So, that's the end of my report, unless there are any questions.
Well, I'll jump in here and just say this is really a big deal, in my opinion. I think I want to congratulate Dr. Prinsky and Ray and the staff. I don't know if it's true, but I was told we're the only lab that's been given NALM status since they started the program. When they started, people like TVMDL, all the network got in at once, but we're the first lab since then.
Well, we're
is
in
there
at
another one?
least, I think there may have been a few, but the microbiologist at NVSL that we worked with has been there for 6 years, and she said we were the first lab she had seen accredited in her time there, so that's...
So huge accolades to Holly and to Ray and the staff, because it took 2 years, and it was not a guarantee we were going to get this. And the important thing is this validates our ability to continue to partner with USDA on future lab projects, funding, and possibly fit into other national surveillance programs and even other diseases and species. So it's a significant accomplishment that they should be congratulated for. So, thanks.
And also on behalf of the commissioners, we're proud of what you guys have done. We know what you've gone through the last year and a half with the downsizing, and you've taken over, and Holly, you've done a great job, and we're proud of you and your staff.
The lab folks are really kind of the quiet bunch of this agency, and they kind of do their job every day. And
Hallelujah.
Yeah, good job.
Go ahead. Let Holly go ahead. Y'all let her get y'all's picture right there.
Okay.
Dr. Storch, do you want to be in the picture too?
Very well said.
Where do you want us? Oh,
Attaboy, girl.
Thank you. Debbie Metzler will go over the administration budget status report. I expect a 30-minute thorough, top to no. Thank you for doing this, really.
We're in item 7, the budget portion. The 2012 budget, we have received 6 cooperative grants, and they all were enacted April the 1st, and they'll go through the cooperative period, March the 31st, 2013. One of them is still waiting approval, but the funds are there and have been pre-approved. The agency has unexpended balance authority, which any unspent funds for 2012, we can move forward to 2013, which should soften the shortfall anticipated for 2013. The 2013 budget, we have the budget forecast, we have allowed for a federal funding decrease of 25%, which shows the budget shortfall. And the third submission report is the revenue. This is showing our anticipated fee revenue, fiscal year to date collected revenue. As of today, all the fees have been implemented. And we got approval by the LBB and the comptrollers that gives the agency the authorization to utilize the new revenue and an increased fee revenue for the agency to spend, which will be spent on expenditures other than salaries. The anticipated revenue amount, we'll reevaluate that later in the year to make sure that it's the estimation is more accurate.
Ma'am, did you say that, so we are getting the possible agency portion as predicted here, is going to be now 100%?
No, it's not 100%. It's only the new fee revenue and any additional revenue. So the state will still get, like we increased health certificates, the agency will receive the increased amount. The state will still receive the original amount. So by that report, as year to date, we have received, the actual is 110,180.86. But we did get approval to spend it, so that will help the budgets.
Do we have any questions?
I want to go on record thanking Debbie for all her hard work. She's gone through some transitions here, and with Dr. Cochran leaving in the budget, she's also a success story. Has worked her way up through the agency. You've been here 30-something years. You
39
started
years,
39
August.
years. She started when she was 7. It was crazy.
She started when you were about 7. Or 5.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I want to thank her, and obviously probably next time Sammy will give this report, but I want to thank Debbie publicly for a long, great career with us. She's not leaving yet, but she should be, commended for doing whatever it takes, and this is a complicated process, and she's a survivor. So thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie, again. Do I have a motion to approve?
Chairman, I
I
move.
move that we approve the administrative budget status report as discussed today.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded. We approve the administration budget status report as discussed today. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, item 8, Fran Robbins is going to go through the consideration of possible action on contracts and purchases. It is still morning. Good morning.
The first items are purchases that have already occurred. The first two were the TV kits for the lab. You'll notice that the second item, $150 is added for freight. That will continue to be the case. So the cost in the second item will continue to be what future shipments will cost us.
Fran, if you don't want to go through each one of these,
Okay.
it's not necessary. what we like to do is this, the commissioners received these packets a few days ago, and if there's any specific questions on any of these, we can ask you. I don't particularly have any. I don't know if any other commissioners have any. What's that?
Unless they can buy a truck for the same dollar.
Yeah, I saw that part.
Which one was that?
On the second page.
On the second page?
Deal on some trucks.
Ford vehicle.
Is this the lease or the purchase?
The purchase.
Okay.
We're doing both. We're leasing some.
Okay,
and
we are.
purchasing some. We have capital purchase authority as well as leasing authority, so.
From there on, it's fiscal 13 purchases. It will be done, they'll be effective September 1st. One's marked with a 3.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contracts and purchases request from January 24th through June 5th, 2012.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We approve the contracts and purchases requests from the 24th of January through the 5th of June. Is there any discussion?
We couldn't hear you second.
You didn't.
second.
Okay.
We didn't know who did.
Mr. Brown seconded. Sometimes I tend to go a little quickly, so, okay. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 9, consideration of possible regulation proposals. Gene, do we have to go through, we've spent a whole...
No, I can go fairly quick.
Let's go fairly quickly. We've kind of looked, I'd like you to just hit the bullet points on what we're talking about. I had a question or two that I thought I'd wait till now, and then we've got 2 public comments on this, so if you want to go through the quick bullet points, I'll ask the public comment, and then we'll go through our discussion.
Okay. You know, and I will just hit the high points. Dr. Ellis acknowledged too, as y'all are aware, as the lawyer, a lot of times I'm trying to build something to fit their needs, and they technically understand more what this is well represented from the discussions earlier and with the discussions with Mitch and Parks and Wildlife. This is an issue that's come up, given great concern, for which the Commission's been asked to go forward and create a high-risk zone for which we have good statutory authority to try to help reduce and diminish the risk of exposing other animals and species in the state to that. So that's what this is. I will say I use a model that, for those who remember, at one time we had a dairy zone out in El Paso based on TB issues and stuff, so it is using this model and that. In the future, we'll look to try to, as Dr. Ellis, something more like the PIRO, where if something becomes up an issue of concerns, he can designate a zone. But that's the purpose. It does have the one thing I will note, and then I'll turn it over to commenters. One of the big issues between the distinctions between the 2 zones is what can move out if you're in based on having participated in a monitored herd status. The proposal proposes for both zones the same, 5 years status. However, for discussion purposes and for comment purposes, some discussion's been focused in the containment zone where the highest risk is at 5 years, and the high risk zone where it's more of a buffer zone being 3. It's proposed at 5 to get comments to give y'all options, so that's just it. One other thing I do make you aware, because it's fairly unique that these kind of rules come up that you see, under the Administrative Procedures Act, we have a takings assessment that needs to be done if it affects real private property, which is land. So, because this does impact a zone and stuff, I've done one of those. It's included it here beforehand going through, just to be able to address those. I don't know that it is. It does not fall into what I call constitutional taking, but because it does implicate those issues, I have done one as part of the process. Only occasionally do I have to do it when it impacts that, but I just wanted to make you aware because it's a fairly unique part of the process that you don't typically see. So with that, anybody wants to bring their comments up, and then unless you have questions right now.
Definition of unnatural movement?
You want me to?
I mean, is hunting an animal and moving the carcass and to another area outside that zone, is that an unnatural movement?
You know what, I'll be honest, I mean, the way this is focused is somebody trapping live, taking an elk and moving it out.
A live one?
Yes. So, carcasses are another issue, but this is focused on preventing the live relocation of animals. And I will say, this is
Could
one of
spread
the-
the disease that way.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. I will say, this is something that came up fairly quickly. This is something that putting it together. I will tell you, that's actually a definition. I have been trying to get feedback in terms of trying to address those concerns clearly in their definition. You feel like that this is something that, in terms of our discussions today, that I should add to it?
No.
Yeah. I can't, I mean, I'll be honest, for the purposes of comment, it's probably worth a lot.
Well, maybe we can get some input from the
I know we have
public
some
comment.
experts here.
Why don't we go to that? Warren Blunster is a private wildlife biologist. Warren, would you like to talk a little bit on this?
Sure. I've got about 45 minutes and an hour and a half.
I got a heavy gavel.
I know you do. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you. In respect of not dragging us back through any of this, I want to take you back to what I call the perspective level and the user level, because I think that's what we're going to really have to deal with. We have other issues we have to deal with on our level, but I want to take you to a couple of points that I want to make. I'm also a member of the health working group and the task force that Dr. Dittmeyer and some of the other groups sit on. I think we've all grown up in this so much together. I think one of us is going to have to die to ever get kicked off of it. But there's a couple of points I want to make to you. The public hasn't had much education in this field. We have had the privilege of all of us sitting together and being educated on this. And I think that I can tell you that I want to be your practitioner just a minute and tell you you're going to experience a mild discomfort when this comes about. The doctor says that to you because he's not experiencing what you're experiencing. So I want to tell you that it's coming. It's coming for all of us. This is a very sensitive issue that affects a lot of people, landowners, users, governmental employees, private biologists. We're all going to be up against this. I usually don't use notes, but I made some stars here that I want to tell you about and kind of point out. I took the lead on hunter-checked carcasses because I thought it was very important coming out of the containment zone. I'm a little concerned with using the term buffer zone. I thought about this a lot coming up here this morning, and I think the word buffer zone leads us down a little bit different road than what we're really going to be on when all of this comes to fruition. There are many other elements that mimic CWD. So it's very hard to diagnose an animal in a physical state. I know you all know that. There are all types of other issues, and that's what makes this very difficult to deal with. Mule deer are a very hot item right now. Mule deer hunting this is one part of the industry that hasn't suffered very bad. These hunters and these guides have a constant flow of inquiries for mule deer hunting. So this is, whatever action we take will influence this industry somewhat. So I tend to be one to pull back on the reins a little bit, and I've looked and sat through all the other issues that other states have made and seen the mistakes, and I think we will only have us to blame if we make those mistakes. We may not do it exactly right. I don't want us to run out ahead and do something that we have to come back and sit in this room and undo. The press is sitting on the starting line. The landowners, the hunters, and the industry are all watching what we do right now. They may not be in this room today, but they're watching us very closely. I would also point out, I don't know if Mitch said this, he may have, but that breeder that's in that area is a mule deer breeder. He's not a whitetail breeder, he's a mule deer breeder. So I want you to know that. Also, I think we would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we didn't do one other thing while we're out there. And if I missed this, I'm sorry, but if we don't test those elk while we're involved in that surveillance, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, because it will leave a void for someone to get us in this room and question our premise and our matrix of how we're doing this. I know I would. I don't want to see huge numbers shot, but if we don't take elk samples, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. There's a little bit of loophole. I want to touch on something Dr. Ellis said. We have to trust the program. 5 years, 3 years, whatever we end up in, if we have to put our faith in that program, because that's the only program we have right now to monitor how those animals are healthy enough to be moved. I made myself a note here because I use this term genetically susceptible and spontaneous, and this is what throws the curve at us, because you may have a facility sitting somewhere else in Texas that may pop up before we get what we think we're going to get in that area out there. And I want you to be very well aware of that, because if it shows up at Rock Springs, Texas, or Lampasas, Texas, we're going to have to shuffle the cards really fast. And so that's why the protocol is so important that we embark on, and how we represent this, because this is going to be difficult. And I think that was my message to y'all today. I think I've looked at most of my stars, and I think that's where they were, and I just want to go back and tell you one more time, this is going to be mildly discomfortable to you when we get kicked off on this. It isn't going to be fun. I do not use the word that I guarantee we're going to find it. I think the odds are very great, but I don't want to use the words guarantee, because what I fear most of all, I think I know how to deal with the disease on the public level, but if it hits at Lampasas or Rock Springs, Texas, before we find it out there, it's going to change the tide of how we have to mitigate and get ready and present this program. So those are my notes to you. Seemed like I always am the proverbial pig up here to talk to you guys. It was the elk, but that's part of disease monitoring, and I think it'll never go away. We're always going to have it. Traceability is the only thing we got. If we don't have traceability, we don't have anything, as tough as it is. So thank you today for letting me present to you, and I appreciate it. Dee?
I was going to ask a question.
Yes.
And what I mentioned to y'all was that at the next commission meeting, there may be a rule proposed to address what happens if we find in the rest of the state that will be more of a high-risk process than a specific geographical zone. But in regard to the elk that you're talking about, I guess, that are out there where there's surveillance going to go on, is there any action, maybe Mitch or Gene, does the commission need to do something to make surveillance and elk happen because of our authority, or are you just recommending that when whoever they are, go sample mule and whitetail deer out there, they also take some elk? I'm not sure what were you telling us something or just saying?
I think I'm giving you a message. I think the program is going to have a giant void in it if we don't test these elk. Now, whether it requires the act from y'all, and I don't think it does. Personally, I don't think it does, but I'm not Gene Snelson, so Gene, you would have to determine that. But if we go out there and we sample those mule deer and we run out of money or we run out of time and we didn't, for political reasons, sample those elk, we're going to be back in this room and somebody's going to be in this audience that's going to come up and say, why didn't you sample one of the most susceptible species we had? You went out there and targeted the mule deer and not the elk. And I really feel that strongly.
Okay.
There are many projects that are going on in Texas right now that involve exotics, movement of animals. I personally have a multi-million-dollar project going from an absentee landowner in the central part of the Texas that's involved in movement of these animals, not mule deer, but exotics. And now we have 2 other additional sandbirds that we got to deal with. We've got red deer and we've got sika. And so we're going to have to be back in here dealing with those because we really don't even know how to, we know how to start, we haven't started yet. So is there any other questions while I'm here? Yes, Dickie?
Yes, I have a comment, hopefully to address some of the concerns you brought up for the commissioners and the public and perhaps yourself. In all of our conversations in the working group, we have tried to keep our conversations and our objective to all susceptible species, not just mule deer, which by definition will include the elk. Texas Parks and Wildlife is going to be the lead agency on this sampling, and I'm sure that Mitch and all of them, just like you and I, share that concern that we have as broad and as representative a sampling as possible. I don't think that Mitch has forgotten, and I know you, Charlie, and I have not forgotten, that the elk play an integral role in establishing a good scientific basis for any of our operations. Today, we're dealing with a specific risk area within a specific geographic zone. That's why we have seen specific highways, roads, and mountains being addressed for this particular issue. But in the protocol that is being developed across the board, the first implementation of any problem when we see a disease threat will be a restriction of an appropriate radius. Once we determine the epicenter of the problem, then the geographic boundaries will be established at that time. We realize that this particular program is for this specific threat here. It can serve as kind of a lead dog for how we'll deal with problems in the future. But rest assured that Dr. Ellis, Dr. Schwartz, and the Texas Parks and Wildlife people will be ready and able to implement a blanket area to be defined after the fact. Thank you for bringing these up to the public, because I think the public needs to be aware that these thoughts have entered our minds and they are also being considered. And thank you for all of the work that you've done through the years on these committees. You bring a lot of professional expertise, experience, and a fairly logical mind. So thank you very much.
For that fairly logical mind. Warren? Okay. Is it,
that ain't bad for a bowel.
That's that pontification I was talking
Well, I have a
about.
question for Mitch. Elk currently are considered just an exotic. There's no regulation of hunting elk in Texas, is that right?
That's correct. They're considered exotic livestock.
Okay. So maybe Parks and Wildlife needs to have a rule that a harvested elk needs to be tested.
Well, but because of my response to you, Parks and Wildlife doesn't have the authority,
Yeah.
and I turned to our...
That'd be ours. Yeah, that'd be ours. We've got regulations in moving, domestic elk or pen-raised elk or people that raise elk.
And I've recently learned from Wyoming Game and Fish that, and Colorado, that there's some questions whether elk are susceptible as mule deer are and as whitetail are. Again, they're learning new things every day. But nonetheless, we do anticipate any cooperating landowner that is willing to allow us to do some sampling, and they do some sampling with us on their properties. We certainly would like to take advantage of any elk that could be sampled for their cooperation.
Well, actually, Gene, this may be a dumb question. Are we talking, and it goes back to your original question about unnatural movement. So are our regulations going to affect elk dead or alive, or just alive? Because that's kind of what, if we have the authority to regulate the movement of killed elk with the test, I mean, that's what I'm not even clear on. What, Gene,
I guess all I was getting at was, and especially when Warren brought up the issue of the elk, if we're going to have people on the ground, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we're going to be doing hunter harvest, which I'm assuming is going to be the main monitoring system, correct? Am I correct in assuming that? So you're going to be working with hunters and landowners in that county, in that county and a half or whatever, 2 counties. The elk are commingled in those areas with those mule deer. I would think that it could just be simply part of the hunter harvest with your existing personnel, and educate the landowners that if elk are killed or harvested, that they need to be tested and samples taken. And Warren?
I have a comment on that, though.
Okay.
There are people that will not want to be involved in this for fear of what will happen to their property. If you enter into another species such as your elk, and I'm not the one that likes this, but I can read the crystal ball. If you don't make it mandatory coming out of that area, you will have people somewhere that won't test those elk.
Okay. I understand.
And I might say too, because y'all do bring up an excellent point, and I will say, like what you're seeing, I've done 4 sets of rules in a month for a wide variety of things. This is something what I would recommend, as we discussed today, that you include, that I will add to it, is for the unnatural movement, that it includes carcasses. And frankly, if you do hunt in the area, you gotta give a sample to be able to move the carcass. It's a legitimate
Specify the area, though.
Well, it'll go to the containment zone. Yeah.
Well, what is Parks' opinion on that?
Actually, that's a good question.
I mean, you can't tell me today.
That's something we spent quite a bit of time at our task force meeting talking about was should we allow for transport of carcasses out of this containment zone? And what the task force said is, if you're not going to allow for transport of carcasses out of the containment zone, are you going to continue to allow people to bring harvested deer and elk in from Colorado? And so the issue was, if we're going to not allow for transport of carcasses out of the containment zone, we need to look at our whole border. And so in our inaugural meeting of this task force, what was decided was that the greatest threat is live animal movement. And we'll try and address that issue right now without jumping into whether or not carcass exports should be prohibited.
But this issue is over surveillance at this point, not on the threat of the car. I don't think we're saying the carcass couldn't leave. What we're talking about is get a test before they leave.
Okay.
They're not the same issue.
And so,
They would allow conduit passes,
Yeah.
in other words, like they do in Colorado. You gotta give a sample, you take it home. If you get a positive, you get notified, somebody goes.
Dee, I think we're gonna get bashed over the head in here if we don't do that.
Well, and actually, this is still a little bit greater level of responsibility for the Texas people, because we don't require every elk from a CWD infected state to have this surveillance. But the reason for this now is to get some initial surveillance for us. So I would recommend that, I'm comfortable with defending why we want some surveillance now on a Texas premise that we're not requiring on a New Mexico, because we're just in the early stages. We may change this later, but for now, this is not a bad, I would agree. I think this is a good idea. That's just my opinion.
for clarification, what my understanding has been up to this point is that the proposal that Texas Parks and Wildlife's been considering for mandatory check stations for that containment zone, that red hashed area, would be for mandatory CWD testing on white-tailed deer and mule deer, simply because that's as far as our authority extends. But the fact is I think Warren made an excellent point. You know, earlier when I spoke, I talked about how this is an unprecedented situation, but the fact of the matter is it's something that I truly believe can be contained. And the way that it can't be contained is with it driving 70 miles an hour down the highway, whether it's a live animal or, as Warren's bringing up, perhaps even a dead animal or a carcass. So I think it is an opportunity, something that is containable, but with prudent action.
So are we talking about, would this be an amendment, Gene, to this rule to include the requirement for testing of hunter surveillance of elk carcasses and other susceptible species, which I would include in that terminology because they may be defined before we meet again? Would that be an amendment to this rule to
All
so
I'm
it's
doing
consistent?
is the motion says is I'm going to take forth what's been discussed today. What I hear is to add this, which I agree to unnatural movements. I add in fact goes to carcasses. Then I'm going to add a section that if you have a susceptible species that falls under our jurisdiction and stuff, in order to take that you have to provide.
And that could be passed at the next meeting?
Yeah, and I'll add it now before proposal because frankly,
All right.
this is a good opportunity to get comments. I mean, like the definition alone, I can get some. You know, Warren said very good comments that I'm able to utilize and bring back a better product. So I think that's why I'll take it for the proposal purposes. Dr. Evans?
For a better product, if you're talking about setting up roadblocks in West Texas and testing deer that are coming through there, if they're coming from New Mexico, I want you to test them because I don't trust what those folks are telling me. They've been sitting there 4 years with CWD there and haven't said a word. And now all of a sudden, oh my, here we've got 4 years results. You know, that we're 4 years behind addressing this thing because they haven't done due diligence telling us what's going on up there. So if they're coming from Colorado or they're coming from New Mexico and they pull up to that check station, get a sample and find out what it says.
Well, I would say that point, if they're entering the zone, that gives us.
But that's a different chapter and a different rule, right? That we'd have to
Well,
come
you
back
get
on
into
that.
injury requirements, but
That's
it's a
a
practical
different-
matter. If they're going into the zone, they can't come out into the zone, they get the zone.
Oh, so you're just saying if they're transecting?
If they're coming through there and stop at that check station, you ought to look at every susceptible species that comes through there, and if it's a Colorado elk, pull a sample on it. Unless they've had one pulled up there.
Sample taken though. I mean,
Well,
it's
only if
Colorado.
it comes out of an endemic
Yeah,
area.
okay, I'm just saying.
See, they could be
If they're missing
they
those-
could be transporting out of an endemic area with a fully intact carcass and be right on that
Yeah.
border, come into Texas with it with no sampling.
Yeah.
It could be going to Central Texas, South Texas, or anywhere.
You know, it looks
They're doing it if he's vertical, why not do it if he's horizontal?
It looks to me that we're trying right now as a commission, a lot of us, this is the first time we've heard of this, I mean, really discuss this. And obviously, the working group has gone through a lot of work, and I'm somewhat confused on what we're trying to do today. Are we trying to do a new proposed rule?
Yes.
And already starting to try to make these, to me, which would be substantive changes, being adding elk? Is that a substantive change?
I don't understand. Adding
Well,
that's already within.
That's what.
It's already been in it?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
in
So
other words-
basically, what you're proposing and then is to maybe delay this while you make an amendment and re-present it to us? Or are we giving you authority to do
No.
that?
All I need from you is the fact, what I hear back from it, these are some good additions that I need to make, that I'll make with your motion to authorize me to publish. That's what I'm asking.
Okay, and then after that's published, then
Next meeting, I would.
hopefully prior to the next meeting, if there's any discussion of that published rule and there needs to be amendments made to that particular proposal, then in a timely manner, those amendments can be made so we can post them on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, I'm good then.
Well,
But I just don't know if it's,
Yeah,
I think
Yes.
it starts in October.
that's why we're here.
ML.
right, okay?
But
So-
one fact, Ernie, there are some ranches in Fort Davis County that have out-of-state hunters that come in and shoot elk and take them out of state.
Right.
I know 2 different places that do that, so.
Then I say, then I'm on board then. I was somewhat confused. I understand where we are now.
Sorry, yeah, this is definitely.
Okay.
a concept. Now, one point I do want to make to forecast for the future is, Warren indicated, Mitch, Dr. Ditmar, with the susceptible species, we currently deal with elk, susceptible species, elk, whitetail, mule deer, blacktail, and moose. Now, there are evidently signs starting to show that red deer and cyca are there. Now, the way our definition's set up is once USDA listed as susceptible, it goes into our system. We have not, currently those 2 are not in this, but that is currently a coming trend. And for most of those, they have not been in any type of monitored status program. So it is going to be a whole new group of animals, so to speak, that will go through some, I'm sure, culture shock.
Interspersed
Yeah.
all
Great.
throughout the state.
Yeah, so I just.
But
Great.
what we're talking about is add an amendment that would require surveillance of hunter-killed elk in this containment
Yes.
zone.
Yes.
I'll just make sure.
And I would say Dr. Edmiston's comment.
And other
I
susceptible.
agree. Because we
Okay.
were focused on the live when I drafted it up, this discussion.
Well, what you're just saying is that they cross the checkpoint, regardless of,
I think that what Dr. Edmiston's comment was valid, that maybe need to be thought about also. Charlie Seal, Charlie is with Exotic Wildlife Association. Charlie's been very active in all of our meetings, and it's good to hear from you, Charlie. Go
Well,
ahead and
Mr.
present
Chairman,
your
I'm not gonna belabor the thing. What I wanted to just bring up is the fact, I want to reiterate what Warren has said. And I work with this working group and have been a part of that, I guess. It'll either be a blessing or a curse, we'll find out down the line. One of the things that I would caution is we're going to use the term "put the brakes on." There's so many questions in here right now, and I think there's certain things that can be done today by this commission, but I think there's things that the working group has not even worked through. I think we're seeing that with all the questions that are coming up. One of the things that that this commission has is a very difficult task of protecting this state's wildlife resources, at the same time not stifling commerce. And that's where we're headed with this. And as Warren said, the producers out here are not going to take, this is going to be really hard to swallow. Now, we've been living with monitoring and surveillance for forever if you're in the whitetail breeder program, which I am. I also am a breeder in one of the states that is the model for how not to do things, and I'm a breeder in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, back in 2002, jumped the gun and set up a bunch of rules. They went in and they tried to kill out every deer in an endemic area. They did a lot of the things that I'm hearing here today. What I would caution this commission to do is I would like to see this state be the model of how to do it, be the model for the rest of the country. And I think in order to do that, we've got some great minds that are sitting on this committee, sitting in this room right here. And like I said, they shut us down totally. We could not move, and there was not CWD within 300 miles of our farm up there. We couldn't move, and After we got our 5 years of status, we were allowed to do that again. So what I'm saying is let's take a lot of this into consideration before we pass a lot of hard, fast rules that we have to come back and either redo or sorry that we ever did it. And really, that's all I have to say. I think education, that's been the biggest thing in the state of Wisconsin. They have frightened those people up there in the initial stages of it. Now they've become so hardened to CWD in that state that it's not a big deal anymore. This is certainly a disease that needs to be managed like any other disease, but it's not the end of the world. Wisconsin's deer population has skyrocketed because of CWD and them trying to kill. They showed that management works. They went in and killed, I don't know how many thousands of deer in that endemic area. They increased the population by 44% in the endemic area. So what I'm saying is let's sit back, let's see what we can do to develop this thing perfectly, and educate. The public needs to know, our hunters need to know, that this is not going to be the end of the world if we ever do find that case that we're looking for.
We don't want black helicopters flying over West Texas.
But that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Charlie. Is there any further discussion? If none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 40, Chronic Wasting Disease, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
Second that motion. Wow. It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 9A, Chapter 40, Chronic Wasting Disease. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to item B, dealing with dairy calf ranches.
All right, Commissioners, what I bring to you is going to be going
Somebody's phone is next to the speaker and it's okay. All right. Sorry.
I bring to you this, the second rule. This goes in our PD chapter. This is one that creates a new section specifically focused on calf ranches. It's a fairly minimal rule focused on a high-risk kind of activity. That is the feeding of colostrum or waste milk that could be involved. It's high-risk material for TB transmission. As I understand it, this was something that was an issue with a dairy in Colorado that managed to have multiple suspects and positives based on this. As such, it's basically declaring that this type of activity is a high-risk activity. It's also just making sure that people keep records of where they get it from. That's exactly the traceability of it, allowing us to quickly determine whether that's a source of infection or concern. And so, and that they keep those records. And so, and I don't know if Commissioner Bauer has anything to add, or Commissioner Ellis.
And I'll just clarify, it's not just milk, it's just the source of calves in general that we're wanting to get our hands around, especially out-of-state calves with multiple owners. And this, in my opinion, just gives our employees the authority to start asking some questions and put together some information to evaluate risk. And we'll work with Commissioner Balma and the industry guys. And if there's obviously a need for further rulemaking or even statutory enhancement, we'll come back. But in the hopes, I think our model here is what we've done with the swine industry, which is we just ask some questions. There's some obvious things that can jump out at you. Have you ever caught a wild hog and bred it to your guilt? And if they say yeah, you go, oh, that's a high risk, and we do some testing. So we're looking for the low-hanging fruit here. Give us a chance to take a look at the calf ranch industry in Texas. We don't know who they are, where they're at, and then we'll may come back and with Commissioner's leadership may want to amend this, change it, enhance it, or whatever. But in my mind, this is just giving us the start to begin a process to evaluate what is the risk for calf ranches. And obviously, calf ranch is a dairy industry issue, but it can jump over into just regular beef cattle as well. And so this is just a toehold for us from my perspective, but I'll let the Commissioner give his thoughts on it. We don't want it to be too punitive or burdensome. This is really a low-key, low-profile start is what my intention is with this.
Yeah, we went back and forth, Dr. Ellis and myself, and Darren Turley with TAD and a few other industry folks, and basically just want something relatively non-invasive to put a little bit of a trap in a place that there's definitely a hole within the industry. You know, for the most part, the majority of dairies, it's not going to be an issue at all. It's the small calf ranches that we're focusing that generally don't follow best management practices and the sanitation things and the identification of it for the traceability. And it's pretty non-invasive. We had a few discussions over it, and it's more just information gathering and what's where and if they've got a tag on them. So you did mention that you were going to have the guys start maybe possibly gathering some information or going around. Have they?
We had to start. Here's what we'll do is we'll have a little group that could include you or whoever from the dairy industry to put together a form, basically of the information that would be of interest to determine if it's a risk activity or not. And then we'll have our inspectors just go to these guys and talk to them and fill out the form. The calf ranch, it's more than just milk, and it's more than just a couple of situations. Historically, throughout the recent TB investigations in large dairies, calf ranches are either the source of spread or a potential source for spread. You can go back to the B23 situation in New Mexico 5 or 6 or 7 years ago where it was out of control. Our last infected dairy in San Angelo, we lost track of potential sources and traces at the level of the calf ranch. Actually, some of them are out of business. They didn't have records. They disappeared. In California, in almost every dairy situation they've had recently, and they've had 4 in the last year TB cases, the calf ranch industry is part of the problem. With that said, the heifer feeders are mainly more like a custom feeder. They're actually feeding somebody's heifers and going back home. The bull calves are usually purchased and mixed and matched and can really be problematic. The only good thing is they usually go to slaughter. But these baby calves can have TB. They can get it from day one, and so they are a source of infection. This is really just an attempt to, at first, gather some information. How many do we have? Who are they? Do we know their name? Do we have their phone number? What are their sources? And again, my take would be out-of-state sources, multiple owners, poor best management practices for biosecurity. Are they cleaning their bottles between calves? You know, and there are places that feed heifers and bull calves. And you can have some transmission. The bulls are going to slaughter maybe, or the steers, depending on where they've been cut. The heifers may go back to a dairy. So it's a first attempt to gather some information that may lead us back to further rulemaking or another policy or another strategy later on. But this is really just, in my mind, validating, giving me the authority from y'all that it's okay to start to ask some questions of what is a high-risk activity for the spread of TB in certain situations in the dairy industry. Not that they're doing anything wrong, it's just when you mix a lot of animals from different sources, you can have issues, and so that's my take on it.
Any other comments? Questions? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 43, tuberculosis, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code, as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments to be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
Second motion.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 9B, tuberculosis. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item C.
Yeah, item C is this is a very short one. This is for our Chapter 45, which are reportable disease chapter. This is adding to the list of reportable disease. And I'm going to butcher the name. Stollenberg disease, but this is something that's currently a problem in Europe. As such, it's a pre-active attempt to be prepared and put people on notice that this is something that should be reported and be sent. So that's all it is just adding it to the list.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 45 reportable diseases located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second motion.
It's been moved that we approve item 9C, Chapter 45, reportable diseases. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Commissioners, I bring you, this actually be the last rule proposal, as I'll explain in a minute, but this is Chapter 49. This is our equine chapter. This is one, as you heard discussed earlier, is setting up to give the executive director authority, the ability to dedicate an area as being a high risk for pyro based on epidemiological reasoning. And as such, be able to require testing to ensure that we have identified all sources for the disease and reduce the risk to other equine in the state. So this process is developed to give them the ability to go forward and do some high-risk testing in the areas where pyro's been a problem. Now, one thing too, I will note, just FYI, because I may have to make the change. FYI, in subsection D, number 4, I reference a subsection J, and it's actually supposed to be the previous section, which is our containment for pyro. So FYI, I will make that change to correctly reference the right section. I put in the wrong thing at the time, so just to make you aware.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendment to Chapter 49, equine, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendment be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 9D, Chapter 49, equine. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Commissioners, I will note that on the agenda, we did have another rule proposal that was for out-of-state movement. Correct, this is in response to the group meeting, as Dr. Ellis had indicated earlier. And so that said, I was able to do the out-of-state ones, but I wasn't able to get the in-state ones done. As such, after we felt like it's probably more prudent to bring them both together at the next meeting. So the next meeting, I will bring the Chapter 51 back with the trick into required revisions that are recommended, as well as all the intrastate activities for tricks that they're handled and addressed at the same time.
Let me just mention on the pyro rule y'all just passed. After this week, we'll have tested all the horses in Kennedy County except 2 herds, who basically said when the commission takes action in a friendly way, we'll go ahead and test our 2. So this was significant to complete an area test. And we'll probably be looking at another area or county test in one of the adjoining counties from Kennedy soon or after you pass this rule. So there is an ongoing epidemiological need for that. So I just want to, not that it matters, but we're finding pyro, and that rule is going to aid us in finishing our hunt, so to speak.
Would the local veterinarians be able to participate in that, or is it going to be the agency to do the testing?
We don't have any money to pay them. We'll do it for free, and if a veterinarian wants to do it and their client wants them to collect the blood, yeah, I think they're more than welcome to help us. No one's offered yet, but yes, we can certainly explore that. The ranches that don't want to do it, from my understanding, it's not because they didn't want their vet to do it, they just don't want to do it. But if maybe there'd be a case where that could help. So yes, to answer your question, yes. But there's no fee basis money to pay them.
So we won't have a motion on that item.
No, there's no, we'll bring it to you the next time.
Thank you very much. On to item 10, consideration and possible action on regulation. This is adopting 2 previous proposals that have been proposed, and we've had comment. I think everybody, do you want to go through this? The way I would like to handle this, and because I know of an amendment that is probably going to be presented, what I would ask my fellow commissioners, if we could have a motion to adopt, have that motion seconded, have it on the table, and then if we have a amendment, we will listen to this amendment. We'll have a motion and a second on the amendment. Then we'll hear discussion. I have 6 people that have signed up for discussion. We'll hear discussion, then we'll vote on the amendment, and then we'll address either the amended proposal to adopt or the original proposal to adopt. So with that, could I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is right. I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 35 brucellosis located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as to be discussed today.
Do I have a second? And I have a second. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer the following amendment.
Okay.
I have copies for distribution.
And this is an amendment to the Chapter 35 brucellosis, correct?
The motion that we just
Right.
made.
Very good.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not the parliamentarian here, but shouldn't we vote on this and then amend it?
No, you have to, you have the amendment, and then you vote on the amendment.
We'll have to vote on the amended motion.
Motion as
Well,
amended.
I need to have the original motion on the floor.
Yes, sir.
Perfectly to have an amendment being done, so that's why, Commissioner Winters, I want to, we now have, I want to make sure all the commissioners have it, and I want to have Coleman go through this, and if Coleman wants to propose this amendment as a motion, then if we get a second, then we'll discuss this amendment and vote on it.
Okay, after this, when the comment period opened for this rule that we're about to vote on, a number of cattle industry groups met and got together and worked on this, and knowing that there would be a lot of older cattle going to slaughter straight from a facility or straight from a ranch, there was a great feeling among those groups, and those groups were pretty well unified in the livestock industry, in the cattle industry, I'll say, to allow those cattle to go to slaughter from that facility on a back tag or other approved ID without putting them in a chute and putting an ear tag in them and subjecting them to that stress. So I would like to propose an amendment to the rule that we just moved and seconded, which would read cattle, it would be in addition to item 2, it would read cattle as described in this subsection and transported direct to slaughter, to a slaughter establishment, may be identified with only a temporary form of identification as approved by the commission. So I would like to submit that in the form of an amendment to the original motion.
As a motion. Do we have a second? And George seconds. Okay, let's discuss this. I think I'll start off with our public comment. We'll start off with Jason Skaggs with Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers. Jason?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank y'all. Before I make a comment on this, I just want to, while I have a few minutes, brief minutes at the mic, I just want to thank y'all for inviting us to participate in the inspector workshops that y'all had down in San Marcos. I got a chance to go down to both of those different workshops and speak, and it was really good to get that feedback from those folks out in the field, and plan on passing a lot of that feedback back to our board as we meet next week in Fredericksburg. Also want to thank Dr. Ellis for including us in the emergency management exercise that was held last week. We had a couple of our special rangers attend that and kind of work at the booth there at the commission booth, and they really appreciated the opportunity to do that. As it pertains to this agenda item, I wanted to just say that since the end of first point testing, which was largely, as we all know, due to budget constraints, cattle moving direct to slaughter have been moving on back tags, and we've had relatively no incidents that we're aware of since that time. That's been going on, as y'all know, since August 1st of last year. And while we recognize that cattle moving to direct to slaughter on a back tag may not be preferable from the standpoint of having that ear tag in their ear, like some of these cattle perhaps were tagged, prior to this, under first point testing, we have seen that the stress of those cattle moving direct to slaughter, particularly due to drought, have been a lot less. And we've got a system actually now that's been working pretty well since last August. And so wanted to mention that. In addition, the state statutes, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an attorney nor am I a veterinarian, but we are very familiar with some of the state statutes that call for the state and federal provisions with respect to identification to be consistent with one another. And so we're looking at a lot of cattle that are moving in and out of Texas direct to slaughter, moving, USDA APHIS currently allows them to move on a back tag. And so we feel like by not allowing the same for Texas cattle for a state rule, that would be creating a discrepancy there that's not quite equitable, at least not at this time. USDA has said that they will phase out the use of back tags for cattle moving direct to slaughter, but we're not quite there yet. And so we think that this proposed rule should be consistent, that the two practices should be consistent with one another. As Dr. Ellis mentioned earlier, the federal animal disease traceability rule is not scheduled to be finally released until probably later this summer. And we're looking at, everybody's anxiously awaiting that, and we've had all the different groups have had a lot of input on that at the federal level. But until we have that final rule, at least some of these questions, at least kind of hanging out there with respect to that back tag issue that I mentioned. With the final rule, the final ADT rule still kind of pending out there, and the scope of this rule, including a lot more producers. We're making a very big step here from where we once were just a short time ago. We feel like, and we have a system that's working right now since last August with cattle moving direct to slaughter, that we do support this amendment as offered by Commissioner Locke. I think all recognize that this is, even as the rule is currently proposed without an amendment, it's not a perfect system. There are going to be issues with tagging cattle, adult cattle with ear tags. Those tags are going to fall out. We're going to have a whole slew of different issues that we're going to have to deal with, and we're committed to working with y'all to deal with. But we feel like that this is something we should at least continue for some time in the future. We think this is a good first step forward. We think that we can revisit this rule at some point in the near future if necessary to make adjustments, just like we've done on TRIC and a number of other rules. Also, I think as Dr. Ellis and I have talked a great deal, he has the authority under current rule and a separate rule, commission rule, to waive or basically require different restrictions as necessary. And so if there is a problem that does develop on these slaughter cattle moving on back tags, Dr. Ellis certainly has authority to make revisions to this rule if we are in between a commission meeting or something like that. So lastly, I would just like to point out, kind of echo some of what Dr. Ellis said in his initial comments, and that is that we've had a lot of discussion about whatever you all decide to do, whether it's to accept this amendment or not. We would definitely respectfully request an implementation period. That was, I think, reflected in our comments along with this proposed amendment suggestion. And I think Dr. Ellis has proposed a January 1st implementation date or enforcement date to begin, and we would strongly support that to allow some time for producer education. We're going to have a lot of work to do getting the details out of this program to members all across the state. We would also echo Dr. Ellis's comments on working with the industry as we work towards implementation and how the mechanics of this rule will actually go into effect. We've got a lot of work to do on that, and we want to get that done as quickly as possible so that producers know what they're dealing with for sure prior to January 1st, but most definitely for that period afterwards. So with that, I'll stand for any questions if y'all have any. If not, I'll leave it.
Took all 5 minutes.
Leave it to the next guy.
Thank you, Jason. You've been working really close with us. We appreciate that. Jesse Carver with the Livestock Marketing Association of Texas. Jesse, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
Chairman. Commissioners, Jason did an outstanding job of kind of echoing where we're at on this. We worked very closely with them trying to develop this amendment. I just want to say for the record that the Livestock Marketing Association of Texas is supportive of the amended rule. It boils down to pretty simple reasons for us is that as market owners, these guys don't get the opportunity all the time to really screen what comes to their front door and they have to handle. And a lot of times they are presented with the case that they have to handle somebody else's problems. And we saw a lot of this through the drought. Cattle coming to town in less than desirable conditions. And so when we look at this, we really try to focus on the markets and do a lot of work with animal welfare. And having this flexibility under the amended rule to not have to handle 100% of these cattle. Dr. Ellis let us know earlier in a meeting that we had with the industry groups that at this point in time, we've got roughly 80% of the markets that are voluntarily tagging either the biggest percentage or a majority of the cattle that are coming through their chutes right now. So we're pretty close, and we're getting a lot of identification at this point in time, but we're doing that under a voluntary system that has some flexibility built into it. So we are supportive of the rule as amended. We'll just ask for your consideration.
Thank you, Jesse. Don Ward. Don Ward also represents the Livestock Marketing Association of Texas.
Mr. Chairman, members, appreciate your service and allowing me to comment. I'll just second what Jesse said. We do support the amended rule. You know, working here in Austin, we become very attuned to human rights and or animal rights, humane treatment issues. And anytime there's an opportunity to lessen the stress on these animals that our livestock markets have to operate, we have to support that. And we think this is an opportunity to give that market operator the opportunity to move those cattle that are in less than ideal condition without having to send them through the chute and through the head gate. Also, I would point out and remind you that the comments to this rule as proposed were overwhelmingly in opposition. And while serving on this commission is certainly not a popularity contest, and you are called upon many times to adopt rules that maybe you get a lot of negative comments to, when you've got that much industry saying, can we make a change, I would hope that the commission would listen. Pretty much that's my comment. We'd like to work on implementation because I think that's going to be a key to it.
Sure. And Don, thank you. I failed to say that and I want to have it on record too from the chairman that the implementation period would be at least 6 months to implemented, or around 6 months and implemented the first of next year. Bill Hyman is with Independent Cattlemen's Association. Bill, good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. We have a policy that supports voluntary animal identification. However, due to the way things are going, we look at this rule. We don't support the first rule as presented. We've worked with industry, we've worked with the commissioners, worked with staff. We've tried to work something that is palatable. We had a proposed amendment that did not come to you because staff council felt that it was too substantive or changed too much the rule, which we felt would be the buyer's responsibility to tag animals that were going back to the country. We do support the use of back tags on the animals going to slaughter. You know, the people that are going to be most affected by this rule are the producers and the saleborns. The saleborns are going to be responsible for tagging the animals. Whichever way we do it, the producers are going to be the ones that ultimately get to pay for it and suffer the injuries to the cattle, the stress on the cattle, because that's our cattle until they're sold. So I ask that you support Chairman Locke, or Commissioner Locke, sorry for the, you don't want that job.
You want it, you can have it.
No way.
Commissioner Locke's amendment, and we do agree on the delay. We think that we're going to have our hands full educating our people. If you remember the distaste we had over premise ID,
We attempted to work on that. We got a lot of people registered, and then all of a sudden USDA just kind of turned the corner and went a different way. Whether this happens or not, I think we should look at the future. We're in definitely a disease-prone area, and we need to be proactive, but I think we need, any rule change that we make needs to be acceptable by the public and the industry, and I hope that you listen to us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Dan Posey from College Station with Texas Veterinary Medical Association.
Thank y'all very, very much for allowing me to speak on this. I'm a veterinarian. I've practiced for about 30 years now, and I'm an accredited veterinarian with the Texas Animal Health Commission. I'm also boarded and through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, and beef cattle practice is my specialty. When we talk about disease surveillance and traceability, it's the key component in fighting the outbreak of disease. And the institution of a permanent ID, a tag, is really, really important portion of this. It's and I appreciate the board looking at this proposal. This is for protection of our clients, the producers that we serve, the small herds and large herds. This is when you start looking at what happened this year, this last year, the number of animals that were depopulated in the country, and then you have animals that will be coming back in. Permanent ID is a really important part so that we can protect those producers' herds. You look at the brucellosis program that we've had, and I feel proud as an accredited veterinarian that the tagging was a very, very important part of that. Traceability was a very important part of that, and the brucellosis program in getting us brucellosis free. The next is the economic impact, and so when we start looking at larger diseases like foot and mouth disease, if we look what happened in 2001 in the UK and how devastating that was to our livestock population, that would be astronomical here, and having a tag system is a very, very important part of that. We're talking about a $30 billion to $100 billion cost to U.S. Associated with that. And we are the biggest beef state. We export. We're the third largest exporter of livestock, beef cattle in the world. And the important part of that is that establishes trade alliance with those partners. The USDA states and are moving towards a more traceable method, and I think that if you start looking at what consumers are looking at, and that is the source verification, consumer confidence, those things, this fits into that. So I think Texas beef cattle industry and veterinarians, beef cattle veterinarians need to be the leader in this portions of it, and we appreciate this proposal that's before us, before you, and the rules that y'all are contemplating. Texas needs to be the leader of this. Thank you.
So are you in favor of the amendment, or are you opposed to the amendment?
The slaughter portion of that with the back tag portion, there's probably, looking at how long that back tag is on is probably not a big issue to beef cattle veterinarians. The idea would be is that moving those cattle that way with a back tag, where we have the problem is cattle returning to the country. That's the biggest issue that I see personally.
So you think the amendment would be acceptable?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
John Johnson with Farm Bureau. John?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Texas Farm Bureau represents over 100,000 beef producers across the state. At our annual meeting last year, we passed a couple of policy changes. One was we want to reinstate the brucellosis first point testing program. We like that. Also, our policy supports animals being identified when they leave the original premise. That's where our folks want to be. They want to protect everything, and they're concerned that once the cow gets beyond that premise, they don't feel like she would get identified at any point beyond that. So anyway, we support the original proposal presented. We will work with the other organizations. However the commission decides, we're there to help any way we can.
And your feeling, Farm Bureau's position on the amendment?
We could probably support it. I mean, we're gonna help. We'll work it. We would just like to see cattle identified when they leave the original premise.
Okay. Thank you, John. I'd open it up to the commissioners. We're specifically talking right now about the amendment. Can I get some feedback?
I'm a little torn between the two, and I understand the perfect world deal where we can trace everything back. I'm also very much proud of the fact that the commission has always listened to industry. And we have an overwhelming from the cattle industry to support this amendment. So I guess I'm a little torn between them, but historically we've listened to industry. I think that's very important.
Yes.
Well, being shy and retiring and never saying much, I'm going to break my long-standing habit. I'm going to take a position on this. Understand where the cattlemen are coming from. I'm a cattleman myself. We, as a commission, have vested on us the responsibility of doing the very best job we can do to protect the health of Texas animal agriculture. Back tags have worked in the past, but they're not the best that we can do. We were briefed today in this commission about failures in tuberculosis traceback, in brucellosis traceback, not some historic fact way the heck back when, but now. 13 cattle herds are going to have to be traced for brucellosis because somebody didn't have one tag in one cow's ear. Darn the luck, I'm sorry it's going to have to run old Bossy through the chute. If you had maybe done this back the last time you came through, you wouldn't have to do it again. But I'm opposed to it. I believe that this amendment opens up a small window for the spread of disease and thus damage to the Texas animal health industry, period. Voluntary ID, no, you're going to have to put something in, but you've got a whole sheet of different types of tags that you can utilize. Don't tell me that cow's never been through the chute or may never come through the chute again. You can do it. Right now, the system working now? No. Dr. Schwartz just briefed us today. It's not working. If I'm going to err, sitting in this chair, I'm going to err on the side of caution. Mr. Chairman, I am opposed to this change. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I tested 3 sale yards for over 15 years, and this was back in the day where one situation I had like 58 bangers from one producer, and I had to go back and S-brand 500 more, and it took me almost a full day just to do that. In that process, you know, in identifying those cattle, I had to deal with back tags. And I've had many experiences where those back tags came off. So I'm against this amendment.
Dr. Emerson?
Chairman Locke, I've got a question here. It says cattle described in this subsection transported direct to a slaughter establishment may be identified with a back tag. And I didn't read the rest of it. But direct to slaughter, does that mean from a ranch to an auction ring to a slaughter plant, or does that mean from a ranch to a slaughter plant? When it says direct to slaughter, are we going to run cows through the auction ring with a back tag and then take her to slaughter, or are we going to go from a particular ranch in a lot to a slaughter plant?
I would assume that cow could go from the ranch.
Can
to
I
the back
clarify?
tag.
Can I help?
Go ahead, please.
The original rule as proposed would not require official permanent ID to go from a ranch to slaughter plant. They can go because the traceability is there when you check them in, they're your cattle. So this rule, this amendment, from what I would understand, is relating to market cattle after the sale. And so that's because the farm cattle can go, they don't have to have an air tag to go to slaughter from a ranch as originally proposed.
I would assume that from your ranch, if you took 20 cows, they're gonna put those 20 cows in the pen XYZ, and they're gonna run them through the slaughter plant as a group, and they're gonna know that they're your cows. So I think that would probably be a moot point on cattle direct from the ranch.
We haven't answered my question yet. If they're going from a ranch to a livestock sale yard and then to slaughter, that's not direct to slaughter.
It is from the sale yard to the slaughter. From the sale facilities to the slaughter.
What is your opinion about cattle moving from a livestock market to slaughter on a back tag, Dr. Emerson?
The TB cows that we're chasing in West Texas now went from a auction barn somewhere in Texas or New Mexico through a buyer and then to the slaughter plant. And they got there and we don't know whose cows they are. And they all had a back tag on them going through the slaughter plant, going through the market. And so we lost those cows. If they're moving direct, and to me, direct to slaughter is not through an auction barn. If they're moving direct to slaughter, direct means from here to there and not stopping somewhere in the middle. I mean, that's what direct means. And so if it's through an auction barn, that's not direct in my opinion, because when they get to that auction barn, we may think we know who's going to buy those cows and they're going to go to slaughter, but they may not. You know, somebody that got grass and green and they want to buy a cheap cow, they go buy an old thin, you know, that she's going to get fat and get bred. And so that's not direct to slaughter. The way this amendment's written, you know, I struggle with the direct to slaughter. What that means is
What we understand is that if does not go to slaughter, those cows have to be permanently ID'd.
the cows going through an auction barn need to be permanently ID'd.
If they're going to the ranch.
Back to the country.
Back to the country. If they're going back to the country,
So
they have to be permanently ID'd.
if we drive up there and unload them, we don't have to tag them until they go back to the country.
Well, they'll back tag them. Most everybody back tags their cows when they unload.
Okay.
You've got a back tag on them with your ownership name. If they the way it's interpreted is that if you don't run the chute, like a lot of facilities like ourselves, when I palpate and I go through the chute, I put a permanent ID no matter what, 'cause I got them in the chute. But if they're not have to go to the chute, you don't want to palpate, you want nothing done to them, you've got a back tag on it and tying it to your name. So
And
if
those
that
cows can, I'm sorry.
yeah, if that cow, let's say, the way they've got it written, goes to the slaughter plant, you've got that back tag on it, next day or 2 days later they kill them, you've got that back tag tied to our facility with a specific number and specific owner. That's all tied to you or whoever. If that cow actually would go back to the country, let's just say you decide, hey, I think she's bred, I want to take her back, then that cow will have to be permanently ID'd to go back to the country. Now, the rules will have to be written in order to decide how we want to do that at that point in time with those cows. But any cows that go back or through the chute would be permanently ID'd.
Where is that written in the original proposed regulation, Dr. Ellis?
Which, you might have lost me there.
Because Mr. Jordan's mentioning cattle that are at a livestock market, that this amendment would allow those cattle, if they're going direct to slaughter.
Well, the original
to
does
travel-
not allow.
Does not allow that.
The original says
Right,
you change
right.
owners, they get a
That's-
tag put in their.
That's where I'm asking, Ken, I guess, in this amendment doesn't talk about cattle that leave a livestock market that don't have a permanent ID, that don't end up at slaughter. I mean, I guess my question is, when you have cattle checked into the sale barn and they're obviously or have deemed to be slaughter cattle, and they do get purchased, where does it say in this, if it gets purchased by a farmer that wants to go turn them out, where does this amendment, or what is the original proposal says everything gets tagged.
Right. Now this
And now,
specifies.
and again, to clarify, everything gets tagged that's not already tagged. If you have visible tags that you could see, most of these livestock markets have very small pens. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Right.
Thinking out loud. If you see some cattle that aren't tagged, they need to be run through to get tagged. My question to you, Ken, I guess, is with this amendment, where does this amendment say that they have to go back to the country? Do they have to be permanently ID'd if they go to the country?
Yes, the way I,
The amendment doesn't say that. If the
The-
motion is passed in its original
Original.
form, it says that.
Okay.
If we amend it, it still says that. It's
Okay.
gonna say that either way, if it's passed.
right, here's the terminology that it has, and it's not amended, actually changing that language. This will say, as cattle that are, are the 18 months of age or older, except steers and heifers, changing ownership within Texas shall be officially identified with an official ear tag or other form of official permanent identification as approved by the commission. That's in the original proposal.
Sure, I understand that.
There's your official ear tag, which is the metal clip, more than likely will be looked. Unless cattle described in the subsection are transported direct to slaughter, establishment may be identified with only a temporary farm identification as approved by the commission.
Okay.
So you still got the permanent tag in place unless it goes directly to slaughter.
I understand that.
When they
However,
go through your auction ring and they change ownership, they're supposed to have an ear tag. It's what the first half of this says. So whether it's when they go through the auction ring and they change from the guy that hauled them in the auction ring to the order buyer that bought them, they're supposed to have an ear tag. It's what the first half of this says.
But the exception, though, is...
The
Right,
exception
that's-
is moving direct to slaughter, and that's not through an auction ring the way it's written.
well, that's not the point I'm trying to get to. I guess what the point I'm trying to get to is to understand this is if this amendment is passed, then as cattle are received in a livestock market, any seller of that livestock can say these cattle are going to direct to slaughter, and the livestock market does not have to tag them. Is that true or false? If the seller of the cattle says these cattle are all going to slaughter here, and 2/3 of them aren't tagged, then there they go. And as we all know, the weather conditions change, and drought and non-drought, and that, I guess, is what I think is Dr. Ellis's situation, in that what you're saying with your assumption on the original part is that if those cattle don't go to slaughter and they just have a back tag, who's going to tag them permanently? Is that the buyer? Who's going to tag them?
That will be implementation that we'll have put in place. I mean, that was discussed already. The buyer will be responsible, and
So-
everybody backed off and said, let's write the rules to take care of that.
What's the time frame too, in direct, Could it be a week or 2 weeks?
I don't know.
We talked about 10 days.
Ken, as we all know, last year there were so many cows going to these plants that they couldn't kill them all as fast as they were buying them from places like your own. And a lot of those cattle were being parked in little growing yards or feed yards somewhere till the cow killer could get to them. 30 days later, 60 days later, whatever. What would your thoughts be on that? If it's a cow killer buys them, he says they're going direct to slaughter, but he's gonna stop them in a feed yard for 30 days.
Originally, that was discussed in the group, and it was even written in one of the proposals at one point about 10 days. But then the discussion would be, they said, several people said, let's just pull that out, let's let the commission decide exactly how that is. Do they need to actually permanently ID the cows if they stay after 5 days, or whatever, instead of trying to write a rule for that particular deal? Implementation side is what the Animal Health Commission would have to write on those particular cows that go into a feed yard. That was discussed, and they looked at 10 days, 5 days, whatever.
Maybe 3.
Maybe 3, but that'd be something we'd have rulemaking possible to set the requirements for that. If they do go to the feed yard for 10, 20, 30, 40 days, they would then have to permanently ID that cow.
Any other discussion?
Just as an additional comment, we have a lot of trouble with folks following simple instructions. We start complicating this, and everybody's got to be looking at a watch and say, oh, damn, we better go tag those cows. It's going to be bad time tomorrow. Also, we have a limited staff and limited resource to try and follow up on what few rules we do propagate. I just see that if we try and accommodate your wishes, gentlemen, we are opening up more opportunity for the unfortunate spread of disease. Where if we'll take this and run with it as is, we are moving in the most expeditious manner with the least amount of trouble for all segments and we're trying to follow and fulfill the oath we took to do our best to protect the overall health of the Texas agricultural animal industries in toto. So I'm sorry your arguments have not swayed me. I'm against it.
Do we have any other discussion? Yeah, Mark?
One thing that troubles me about doing this amendment or any amendment as far as requiring identification is that puts the burden on the sale barns or whoever. What about the guy, what if I go buy 10 cows in Carson City from some guy or from 2 or 3 different guys, doesn't have any identification? In other words, if I'm an order buyer and I go buy a truckload of cattle and send them straight to an auction mart, straight to the slaughter plant, to L&H Packing or whatever, who polices that to see whether they have a tag? And I bought them from 5 different, 10, 13 different places.
As Dr. Ellis has said, ever since he's assumed his position, none of these programs work for crooks.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it doesn't work there.
They do work for voluntary compliance.
But it doesn't work there. It's putting a burden on the people in business. And that's just throwing it out there. It's not being fair to all individuals.
I think Mark makes a good point. We're talking about trying to, at the markets, I think we're all discussing 100% everything I need, but then you got your enforcement guy there, but then we got all these ranch deals that go on daily that we're not going to be able to enforce. So we're worried about tying it here, and we still got a back tag on at least all those cows going to the slaughter plant. We're permanently IDing all the other ones. We got ranch deals going on daily out here that will never be ID'd. They'll move on. We have no way to enforce it. So we're going to put permanent surveillance on this one and none on the other. Even in the brucellosis day, there's cows that traded regularly that were not brucellosis tested. Went change of ownership. And you're going to have the same here. There's no way to enforce it. There is no way to enforce buying some cows for Chuck and somebody else buying them and him actually IDing those cattle. They can move and nobody ever knows the transaction occurred. So we're not going to be able to police 100% of it. You've got a lot more concentration within the market, and even with the tag on it, when it gets there and that cow's going to slaughter, we can match that back tag back to that owner. You may lose to that owner, 2 of them, but you can then identify at least to there. You're talking about a short period, but you're permanently IDing the rest of the cows. I just don't think we can get 100%. You're not going to get them in the country. No. And I think that's what our markets would say. If you're going to do it in the market 100%, then do it in the country 100%. Well, that becomes very difficult.
The way this is written, I just don't see anywhere in here that it talks about a livestock market. Your amendment, I'm sorry, I just don't understand anywhere in there. How direct to us, it says moving direct to a slaughter establishment. It doesn't say anything about going through marketing channels.
Well, this is all in change of ownership under the section of brucellosis, which required us to do all the testing in the past. That's why they chose this entire section. You have to go back to the entire section under
It falls
brucellosis.
under all change of ownership.
All change of ownership.
The original.
That's the whole section it's under.
But the amendment, the part that's in yellow here, how does that talk about movement through a livestock auction? Explain that to me. I really don't understand it. Direct to slaughter, does that say anything about movement through a livestock auction?
It's change of ownership. If you look in the top part,
It just goes back to change of ownership.
change of ownership.
So that deals with pasture cattle too then?
Yes.
Not just the auction. So
No, it's
the burden
changed.
is not only on you.
Agreed. Just, we're talking about enforcement, what I was discussing a while ago. But if you look at the original section, it does talk about change of ownership.
So if a pasture sale, the people are honorable and trying to follow the law, they're going to tag it, just as though you do it there. So I don't see the argument that the pasture cattle are going to go free and the livestock market cattle are not. It's, once again, it's a voluntary compliance. And the honest, ethical people will comply, and the crooks don't. And that's just the way it always will be.
Right now, we have an amendment on the table. Do we have any more discussion on this amendment? Yes, Brandon.
I just want to go on the record, Mr. Commissioner, that I am, with all due respect, I'm for the original amendment and on the dairy representative, not the amendment, the original proposal. Excuse me.
Okay.
And, greater traceability, it's better for the industry, and that's where we stand on it.
Okay. Then what I intend to do right now is call a vote as a show of hands for all those in favor of the amendment. Please raise your hand. 5. Am I correct? Please, one more time. 5 in favor, and those against? 8? 7? I can't count, I went to A&M.
That's 8.
Oh, I didn't count myself.
Yeah,
So the amendment fails.
I just had a question for Ken, you know, when those cows come through and you put a back tag on them, why can't you just put the ear tag at the same time?
Most of those are done without.
You'd have to run
any
through the
head gate.
chute.
You don't have a chute on your unloading areas. You gotta run them through the vet chute to do it. So that's what the issue is. You run those cows through twice and catching the head gates, and cows go down, bruises, all those sort of things.
So now, we have on the table the original motion, item 10A, chapter 35, brucellosis, has been moved and seconded. Do we have any more discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Motion carries. Gene, we will now go to the last item.
The little rule. This is an entry requirement one, it was some cleanup. It literally was doing a couple of things. One, allowing for swine to come in from out-of-state premises that are from a validated or qualified monitored herd for swine to go to a market to be sold without needing a particular veterinary special entry requirement. As well as to align the consistent states for scrapie as being an exception to the entry requirements. And then the last couple things were to take out, as Dr. Ellison indicated earlier, this is adopting the change to the requirements for a statement from states where the scuteal stomatitis has been diagnosed, that no longer need to have that veterinary statement on there. And the last thing was to take out of the swine chapter the term they're supposed to write on the health share that they haven't been exposed to hog cholera, which is historical disease that is no longer a valid need for the vets to do. So we were just removing that, so just clean up. So with that, that's it, unless you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt amendments to Chapter 51 into requirements located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second. Been moved and seconded that we adopt item 10B, entry requirements. Any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We have no other public comment, no recognition. So we are to item 12, to set a date for the 384th meeting. I want to have 2 more meetings before the end of the year, before this recent proposed regarding Chapter 35 is implemented. We are always open at this commission and and I think have a very good reputation of working with our producers. Sometimes we do things that may seem opposite from what our producers want, but we're always ready in a timely manner to listen to changes that could help and improve these regulations. And my office is always open. Y'all have my number. I will help if need be to anything that we pass that burdens the industry whatsoever in any way whatsoever. We want you to know that we're cognizant of that fact and that we're willing to do the best we can not to stifle or to curb commerce in this state. So with that, we'll move to set the date for the next meeting. That being, I think sometime this fall. So maybe we kind of split between now and I hate doing December meetings, but what we may do if we see we'll try to plan as early a fall meeting as we can, to where if it does seem necessary prior to the end of the year of having another one, then we can. Could you get some dates out to folks, and we'll just do that via email? And what month do y'all want to think about?
September is fairly open for Dr. Ellis.
Maybe a mid-September, first part of September?
The
And then at
25th.
that time, we'll determine whether we need a year-end meeting or wait till 2013.
Sounds good.
Sounds good? Okay. Then that's where we'll look. I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.